A retired Navy SEAL inherited a forgotten stone house beside Alder Falls. Then his German shepherd, Flint, heard something moving behind the walls. Beneath the cottage, they found a tunnel sealed from the world for 50 years. Inside waited an old warning, and a system the town no longer knew existed. When mountain runoff sent the river rising, that forgotten system suddenly mattered. Corbin came to sell the house, but Flint may have led him there for a reason. Where are you watching from? Comment below, like the video, and subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Stories. At 5:40 every morning, Flint placed his muzzle against the edge of Corbin Wade Thayer's mattress. Not 5:39, not 5:41, 5:40. The German shepherd had apparently accepted retirement from the United States military but rejected the concept of sleeping late. Corbin opened one eye. Flint stood beside the bed with the patient, immovable expression of an animal who had once waited beside helicopters, armored vehicles, and men carrying rifles, and therefore did not consider one tired human under a blanket particularly intimidating. "You know we're retired," Corbin said. Flint's ears remained upright. "That means no formation." The dog blinked once. Corbin stared back. After several seconds, he pushed the blanket away. "Fine, you win again." The words carried more humor than annoyance. There had been a time when Corbin Wade Thayer, 43 years old and already gray at the temples earlier than he had expected, woke before dawn because other men depended on him. For more than 2 decades, discipline had entered his bones so deeply that he no longer knew whether it belonged to the Navy or to him. He was 6'1", about 1.85 m, with broad shoulders and the solid, balanced build of a man trained for endurance, mobility, and practical strength rather than display. His face had been carved harder by weather and years than by age. Angular features, a defined jaw, moderately pronounced cheekbones, a straight nose, and deep blue-gray eyes that habitually noticed doors, windows, hands, shadows, and changes in tone before they noticed decoration. His skin was sun-browned and slightly rough from years outdoors. Dark brown hair remained cut short in the military style he had never found a reason to abandon, though premature silver now showed clearly at both temples. Short natural stubble darkened his jaw. That morning, as on most mornings, he dressed in the same clothes that had slowly become his civilian uniform. A worn red and black flannel shirt with fraying at the collar and cuffs, a light gray t-shirt beneath it, faded dark blue jeans, old brown leather work boots scratched by dust and weather, and the old military watch he still wore on his left wrist. He had stopped wearing a uniform. He had not stopped needing one. Flint waited at the apartment door. At 8 years old, the retired military working dog remained powerful without being oversized, built in the lean, efficient lines of a working German shepherd. His short black and tan coat was dense and healthy, with a clean black saddle over his back, a dark muzzle, and warm tan coloring along his chest and legs. His upright triangular ears seemed capable of turning independently toward sounds Corbin had not yet noticed. Amber brown eyes watched the world with the sober intelligence of an animal who had spent most of his life being taught that details mattered. A thin old scar crossed Flint's right shoulder beneath the fur. There were also a few pale hairs beginning to gather around his muzzle. That bothered Corbin more than he admitted. Flint still moved quickly, still held himself with the same alert confidence, still responded to a shift in Corbin's breathing before most people could read his face. But after sleeping for several hours, the dog sometimes needed an extra second to straighten his hind legs. It was almost nothing. Corbin noticed almost nothing for a living. The apartment outside Tacoma was clean because Corbin was incapable of living any other way, but it had never become personal. The walls were bare. There were no framed photographs, no plants, no shelves filled with objects that told a visitor anything useful about the man who lived there. The furniture was practical and inexpensive. The kitchen held exactly what one man and one dog required. 2 years after leaving the Navy SEALs, Corbin still lived as though someone might call tomorrow and tell him to pack. No one ever did. He worked enough to avoid thinking too much about that fact. Security assessments, short private protection contracts, occasional training jobs for companies whose executives liked hearing that the quiet man explaining emergency exits had once been a SEAL. Corbin disliked that part. He never introduced himself with his old career unless it mattered. Usually it didn't. The work paid well enough. Money had never been the problem. The problem was that Corbin had spent most of his adult life knowing exactly why he needed to wake up. Now he sometimes reached evening without being able to answer that question. Flint answered it for him in smaller ways. Breakfast, walk, medication after hard days, fresh water, a hand checking the old scar, a door that had to open because a dog was waiting beside it. Corbin had once believed responsibility had to be enormous to matter. Flint had quietly reduced it to ordinary things. That morning, when Corbin returned from walking him, a large cream envelope lay half beneath the apartment door. He stopped before picking it up. Flint stopped too. The return address belonged to a law office in Alder Ridge, Washington. Corbin knew the town only vaguely. East of the North Cascades, forest country, mountains, river valleys, old timber roads. The name beneath the office letterhead meant more. Estate of August Bellamy. Corbin stood in the entryway longer than necessary. August Bellamy belonged to the oldest rooms in his memory. A tall, narrow man with long arms, weathered fair skin that had browned deeply during summers outside, gray eyes behind wire-framed glasses, and sandy hair that had gone almost completely silver by the time Corbin was a boy. August had possessed a long, thoughtful face with a prominent nose, and an uneven gray mustache that made him appear more severe until he smiled. He had been a hydraulic engineer by profession and had served in the Navy years earlier with Corbin's father. Corbin remembered him visiting their house only a handful of times. August spoke slowly and listened without interrupting, a habit that had made adults trust him and children initially suspicious of him. He also had a peculiar way of treating machinery as if it had moods. A stubborn pump was having a bad morning. A truck that would not start was holding a grudge. Corbin's father had once called him the only engineer he knew who apologized to broken equipment before repairing it. August had also owned a German shepherd named Ash, though Corbin's memory of the dog was incomplete. A large, dark-saddled working shepherd with intelligent brown eyes, a strong but calm posture, and a tendency to sit beside August as if the two of them had privately agreed that most human conversation required supervision. Ash had been disciplined and reserved rather than openly friendly, but Corbin remembered the dog once placing a heavy paw on his shoe when he was perhaps 9 years old, and refusing to move until Corbin stopped trying to secretly feed him bacon beneath the table. That had been decades ago. Corbin tore open the envelope. August Bellamy had died at 82. The sentence was professionally worded. It landed strangely. Not grief exactly. Corbin had not known the man well enough for grief to claim the full space. Something quieter moved instead. The awareness that another person connected to his father had disappeared. His father had been gone for years. Now August was gone too. The people who remembered the version of Corbin that existed before deployments, funerals, classified places, and long flights home were becoming fewer. Flint approached and sniffed the envelope. "Legal paper," Corbin said. "You're not trained for that." Flint sniffed it again. The letter explained that August had named Corbin as beneficiary of a property outside Alder Ridge, a stone cottage, approximately 38 acres of forest, and several recorded access rights and easements associated with the land bordering Alder River. Corbin read the paragraph twice, then a third time. Why, Flint sat. That was rhetorical. Inside the envelope was a small brass key taped to a folded note. The handwriting was unmistakably old, slightly shaky but deliberate. Corbin unfolded it. There was only one sentence. "When the dog refuses the easy road, follow him." Corbin looked at Flint. The German shepherd looked back with the steady amber eyes of an animal who had no responsibility for the eccentricities of dead engineers. Corbin exhaled through his nose. "He never even met you." Flint tilted one ear. Yet August had known about him. That was not impossible. August and Corbin's father had stayed in contact for years. After his father died, occasional news could have traveled through veterans they both knew. Corbin's military career was hardly a secret among the small circles that remained connected. Neither was the fact that his retired K-9 had gone home with him. Still, something about the sentence unsettled him. Not because it felt supernatural, because it felt personal. August had written it expecting Corbin to understand, and Corbin didn't. For several minutes he considered calling the law office and arranging for a local realtor to inspect the property without him. Then he looked around the apartment. Bare wall, bare table, 2 clean plates drying beside the sink. A duffel still stored in the closet because he had never bothered buying proper luggage. It occurred to Corbin that he had spent 2 years avoiding unnecessary destinations. Alder Ridge was at least a destination. He folded the note. "We'll look at it," he told Flint. The dog stood immediately. Corbin gave him a narrow look. "Don't make that into prophecy." 3 days later, Tacoma disappeared behind them. The roads grew narrower as Corbin drove east and north through Washington, leaving heavier traffic for long valleys and forested slopes. Early June had turned the landscape almost aggressively alive. Douglas firs climbed the mountainsides in dark green columns. Western red cedars gathered in the wetter ground, their branches hanging like layered curtains. Alder trees caught the sunlight with brighter leaves that flashed silver green when the wind turned them. Flint rode in the back, secured properly, his dark olive working dog harness resting across his chest and shoulders. The harness was old but maintained, with a small faded military patch worn almost smooth from years of use. The dog watched the landscape through the partially lowered window. Every few miles his nose lifted. Corbin understood the behavior without needing to look. Wet earth, pine, roadkill, cold streams, deer. Another dog somewhere near a farmhouse. Information passed through Flint in sense the way road signs pass through Corbin. By mid-afternoon, the road began following Alder River. The water ran clear and fast between rocky banks, reflecting hard white sunlight where the trees opened. Corbin found himself slowing the truck. He told himself it was because the road was unfamiliar. He knew better. The country was beautiful in a way that resisted being dramatic about itself. No manicured overlooks, no resort signs. Just water, stone, timber, distant ridges, and broad areas where a person could disappear from sight without being lost. Something in Corbin's chest loosened, not healed. He had stopped trusting words like that, but loosened. A weathered wooden sign announced Alder Ridge. 7 miles. Flint sat forward. His ears changed, Corbin noticed. What? The dog looked toward the river. Nothing followed. No bark, no growl, only attention. Corbin kept driving. 20 minutes later, the paved road ended at a fork. The route on Corbin's printed directions indicated the wider gravel road to the right. The narrower road to the left was half covered by grass and descended toward the sound of moving water. Corbin slowed. Flint suddenly rose and pressed his nose toward the left side window. His body became completely still, not excited, not frightened, listening. Corbin looked from the dog to the old note resting beside the gear shift. When the dog refuses the easy road, follow him. For one ridiculous second, he nearly turned left. Then experience overruled curiosity. No, Corbin said quietly. We're not taking instructions from dead men through dogs. Flint remained focused on the overgrown road until the truck turned right. Corbin drove another 100 yards. Then he noticed an old metal marker nailed to a cedar. Bellamy property, 0.8 miles, the arrow pointed right. He glanced in the mirror at Flint. Flint sat down. Corbin could have sworn the dog looked unimpressed. The moment passed. But the sentence from August no longer felt quite as harmless as it had in Tacoma. The Bellamy property appeared at the end of a private gravel lane. Corbin stopped the truck before reaching the cottage. For several seconds he did nothing. The house sat on a broad natural terrace of exposed bedrock, roughly 20 to 25 feet above the river's normal level. It was built from irregular gray and brown local stone, 2 stories in places, with a dark cedar shingled roof, and 2 substantial stone chimneys. Ivy climbed one corner but had not yet swallowed the walls. The windows were tall and old-fashioned, several clouded with dust. A deep porch faced the river. Beyond it, the land dropped through ferns and mossy rock toward Alder River, and farther upstream, framed by the opening of the valley, Alder Falls poured white from a cliff between green mountains. It was farther away than photographs might have suggested, perhaps half a mile, but the bend of the river and the shape of the valley left the entire waterfall visible from the house. Sunlight struck the falling water. Mist rose above the trees. Corbin had seen places far more dangerous. Very few had been more beautiful. Flint made a soft sound in his throat. Yeah, Corbin said. The cottage was not ruined. That surprised him almost as much as the landscape. The cedar roof needed repair in several places. Gutters sagged. One side of the porch had settled slightly. Ivy had reached the second-story sill, and weather had silvered the exposed wood trim. But the structure was sound. Someone had cared for it until relatively recently. Corbin stepped out of the truck. Flint waited for release. Okay. The dog jumped down, landed cleanly, then paused for the small extra beat Corbin had begun noticing in his hind legs. Corbin pretended not to see it. They walked toward the house. The key opened the front door. Inside, the cottage smelled of cool stone, old wood, dust, cedar, and the faint mineral dampness common to houses near moving water. Furniture remained under cotton sheets. A clock on the mantel had stopped at 11:17. Books filled built-in shelves. A pair of reading glasses sat beside a chair as though August might return after lunch. Corbin stood in the doorway longer than he meant to. An empty house differed from an abandoned one. An abandoned house felt discarded. This one felt interrupted. He moved room by room, assessing automatically. No forced entry, no significant water damage, no obvious structural shift, kitchen dated but usable, fireplace intact, several windows stuck, roof flashing questionable on the north side. It was the kind of list that settled his mind. Problems with names were easier than emotions without them. Outside again, Corbin inspected the foundation while Flint wandered the edge of the lawn. Normally, the dog kept Corbin within his peripheral awareness. This time, Flint moved toward a shallow depression where an old drainage line crossed the garden. Flint. One ear turned. The dog continued. Corbin straightened. Flint stopped near a moss-covered piece of rotting timber half buried in the soil. His nose lowered. He sniffed along the earth, shifted several feet, then froze. The change was immediate enough to pull Corbin's full attention. Flint tilted his head, then scratched once at the moss, twice. Corbin walked over. "What did you find?" Flint backed away half a step. Corbin crouched and brushed away the moss with one hand. Nothing. He scraped away more damp soil. Metal caught the sunlight. At first he thought it was an old utility plate. He worked it free. The object was a round brass survey marker, greened around its edges by age. A broken piece of rotten post remained attached to the back, suggesting it had once stood above ground before weather and roots pulled it down. Stamped across the face were two characters, A17. Corbin rubbed his thumb over them. No company name, no county seal, no coordinates, just A17. Flint sniffed the marker, then lost interest and turned toward the river. Corbin looked at the brass disc for another few seconds. Survey markers were not mysterious. Old rural property was full of forgotten infrastructure. Drainage systems, wells, utility routes, property boundaries. He placed the marker on the porch step. By evening, he had almost forgotten it. Almost. The first night at Alder Falls was colder than Tacoma. Corbin ate from a skillet because unpacking dishes for a temporary stay seemed unnecessary. Flint ate beside the kitchen door, then slowly circled the living room before lying near the stone fireplace. Corbin opened two windows. The sound of Alder River entered immediately. Beyond it came the deeper, continuous thunder of the falls. It should have been loud enough to make sleep difficult. Instead, the noise had a strange steadiness to it. Water did not hesitate. It simply continued. Corbin lay on an old sofa because he had not yet inspected the upstairs mattresses. At some point after midnight, he slept. Then Flint's nails clicked once against the wood floor. Corbin's eyes opened. His hand moved automatically toward where a weapon would once have been. There was none there. He looked at his watch. 2:13 a.m. Flint stood in front of the fireplace. Not barking, not growling. His tail was still. Both ears pointed toward the lower right side of the stonework. Corbin sat up. "What is it?" Flint did not look back. Corbin listened. River, falls, wind moving through cedar branches, the subtle ticking of cooling metal somewhere in the kitchen. Then tap. Corbin's eyes narrowed. Tap. A pause. Tap. 3 quiet metallic knocks from inside the wall. Silence followed. Corbin stood. Flint shifted closer but did not touch the stone. Corbin put one hand against it. Cool. No obvious vibration. He crouched and examined the base of the fireplace with his flashlight. Nothing. No loose stone. No vent. No visible pipe. Several minutes passed. Then the sound returned. Tap, tap, tap. Exactly 3. Corbin marked the location with a pencil line near the floor. He checked the exterior of the house with Flint beside him, inspected the chimney base, looked for branches or loose metal that might transmit sound. Nothing explained it. He could have started removing stone. He did not. Years of training had taught him that curiosity was not permission to become stupid. Whatever was behind the wall had remained there for decades. It could remain there until daylight. Back inside, Corbin returned to the sofa. Flint did not. The German shepherd lowered himself directly in front of the fireplace, head resting between his paws, ears still angled forward. "You planning to stare at that all night?" Flint exhaled. Corbin closed his eyes. For a long time, he remained awake. Not because he feared the wall, because for the first time in years, he was impatient for morning. At sunrise, Alder Falls turned gold-white in the distance. Corbin made coffee, fed Flint, then took a tape measure from his tool bag. He measured the cottage's outside western wall, then the interior length of the living room. He repeated the measurements. Once, twice, a third time. The numbers remained wrong. Nearly 4 feet of space existed between the inside wall behind the fireplace and where the exterior wall should have been. Corbin stood in the center of the room, tape measure still extended in his hand. Flint sat beside the fireplace. The old brass A17 marker rested on the porch outside. August's note lay folded on the kitchen table. 3 unrelated things. At least that was what Corbin told himself. He looked at the wall again. When he had driven to Alder Falls, he had thought about acreage, repairs, taxes, resale value, and how quickly he could return to Tacoma. He was no longer thinking about any of them. What bothered him was not that August Bellamy had hidden 4 feet of space inside an old stone cottage. What bothered him was the growing suspicion that August had expected Corbin to notice, and perhaps, somehow, had expected Flint to notice first. Corbin did not touch the stonework immediately. That surprised him. There had been a time when an unanswered question would have occupied every useful part of his attention until he forced an answer from it. In the teams, hesitation could become danger. Unknown rooms were cleared. Unknown sounds were located. Unknown routes were reduced to angles, distances, exits, and probabilities. But an old cottage in the Washington woods was not a hostile building, and Corbin was no longer required to treat every mystery like an enemy. So instead of taking a pry bar to the fireplace, he went outside and repaired the porch. The second tread had begun to pull away from its support. He removed the rusted screws, cut a replacement block from a piece of cedar stacked behind the shed, and reset the board until it stopped complaining beneath his weight. Flint supervised from the shade. The 8-year-old German shepherd lay beneath a broad oak near the edge of the lawn, his dark olive working dog harness resting across his lean black and tan frame. Sunlight moved over the clean black saddle of his coat whenever leaves shifted overhead. His amber-brown eyes followed Corbin with the solemn judgment of a foreman who had neither lifted a tool nor approved the budget. Corbin tested the stare. Solid. Flint opened one eye. "I appreciate the enthusiasm." The dog closed it again. Corbin almost smiled. Over the next 2 days, one repair became another. A maple branch had been rubbing against the north edge of the cedar roof, so he cut it back. Leaves packed against the foundation had trapped moisture, so he cleared them. 2 windows had swollen in their frames and required patient sanding before they moved freely again. One gutter bracket had pulled loose. A porch rail shifted when leaned on. A kitchen cabinet door hung half an inch lower than its neighbor. None of these things mattered much. That was precisely why Corbin found himself enjoying them. No radio crackled in his ear. No one waited for an extraction time. Nobody's life depended on whether the sash opened smoothly. If he cut a board too short, the consequence was another board. For a man who had spent most of his adulthood in professions where mistakes carried faces, names, and funerals, the modest forgiveness of carpentry felt almost luxurious. By the 3rd morning, the cottage had already begun to look less abandoned. Corbin noticed it only when he carried an armful of dead ivy around the corner and saw the front wall unobstructed for the first time. Gray-brown fieldstone caught the sun. The tall windows reflected patches of sky. Beyond the porch, Alder River moved steadily through the valley, while the distant falls remained a white vertical line between green slopes. He stood there for a moment longer than necessary, not admiring his work exactly. Recognizing it, he had improved something, not secured it, not defended it, improved it. The distinction unsettled him in a way he could not quite name. Flint suddenly lifted his head. A vehicle was approaching along the gravel lane. Corbin heard it several seconds later. An aging blue Subaru appeared between the trees and stopped short of the porch. The woman who stepped out looked to be in her early 70s, though she carried herself with the upright economy of someone who disliked being treated as fragile. She was about 5'5", slender without looking delicate, with lightly freckled fair skin weathered by years of mountain sun. Her silver-gray hair was cut into a practical chin-length bob tucked behind both ears, revealing a narrow face, fine cheekbones, and clear hazel eyes that seemed to register details before politeness required her to comment on them. She wore dark trousers, walking shoes, a cream blouse beneath a navy cardigan, and carried a covered pie in both hands. Corbin had met people who used food as hospitality. He had also met people who used it as reconnaissance. This woman, he suspected, was capable of both. Flint rose but did not approach. The woman stopped beside the car and looked at him first. "Well," she said, "you must be Flint." Corbin leaned one forearm against the porch rail. "That's usually how people introduce themselves to me, too." She looked up at him, then smiled. It transformed her face, making the sharpness warmer rather than softer. "Miriam Bell." She climbed the first step and offered the pie. "I was the librarian in Alder Ridge for 34 years, which means I know too much about everyone, and have been professionally trained not to admit it." Corbin took the dish. Useful skill. It has paid terribly. Her gaze moved across his face without lingering on the premature silver at his temples, the weathered skin, or the old military watch. She appeared to understand what he had done for a living without needing confirmation. More importantly, she did not ask. Corbin liked her for that. Miriam glanced at the repaired porch. "You work fast." "I had time." "That's a dangerous thing to give a man who owns tools." She turned toward the cottage. For several seconds, something quiet entered her expression. "You've made it look less lonely." Corbin did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Miriam seemed perfectly comfortable with silence. Flint approached slowly, sniffed the air near her hand, then stepped back. Miriam did not reach for his head. Another point in her favor. Instead, she let her arm hang naturally until Flint chose to sniff her fingers. August would have liked him, she said. You knew August well. For more than 30 years, she looked toward the river, long enough to know when not to ask what he was doing. That got Corbin's attention. He invited her inside. The pie turned out to be blackberry, made with fruit Miriam said she had frozen the previous summer. They sat at the kitchen table while Flint settled near the open door where he could see both of them and part of the yard. Miriam explained that August had lived at Alder Falls until nearly 3 years earlier. The decline had not been dramatic. That seemed somehow more fitting. He had slipped on ice one winter and damaged his hip. Several months later, he suffered what doctors called a transient ischemic attack. No major paralysis, no catastrophic memory loss, but enough weakness and dizziness to make living alone beside a river increasingly foolish. August despised assisted living, Miriam said. Corbin cut another narrow piece of pie. Most people do. Oh, he didn't dislike the people. He disliked the thermostats. Corbin looked up. He claimed no building should have one person in an office deciding how warm 40 other people were allowed to be. That sounds oddly specific. He wrote letters. Of course he did. Miriam laughed. For a few minutes, Corbin could almost picture August exactly as he remembered him. Tall, narrow shoulders under an old work jacket, silver hair refusing to lie flat, wire-framed glasses sliding down his nose while he argued with some machine or institution that had offended his sense of proper function. The image faded when Miriam mentioned someone named Walter Crane. Walter had been one of August's closest friends. Miriam described him as a stocky, broad-handed man in his late 70s with a square face, a short iron-gray beard, and a permanent squint developed from decades working around sawdust, welding sparks, and bright mountain snow. He had spent most of his career as an industrial electrician at a timber mill, and had the practical temperament of a man who trusted wiring diagrams more than conversations. According to Miriam, Walter spoke very little, fixed nearly anything, and considered punctuality a moral virtue. After August moved away, Walter came to the property every few months. He checked the roof, ran water through the pipes, cleared drainage, started an old generator, and some other things, Miriam added. Corbin's fork stopped halfway to the plate. What things? Miriam looked toward the living room. I never knew. August didn't tell you? He told me plenty, just never what I asked. Corbin waited. Miriam's eyes narrowed with memory. Walter used to call and say he was going out to check the lower systems. That was the phrase. I assumed pumps, drainage, maybe the well. This house has always had more plumbing than a cottage has any moral right to possess. When was Walter last here? A little over 16 months ago. Miriam's expression changed. He died that winter. Heart attack in his kitchen. Quick, they said. Corbin set down his fork. After Walter died, no one had taken over his visits. That explained several things at once. The cottage was weathered but not decayed. The plumbing had not frozen catastrophically. The hidden systems, whatever they were, had not been unattended for decades, only for a little over a year. Miriam folded her hands around her coffee mug. Then she said something that shifted the conversation. August didn't call this place his house. Corbin looked at her. What did he call it? The station. What station? I asked that for 25 years. And he once told me a station is wherever somebody stays when everybody else has gone home. Corbin felt the hairs along his forearms rise, though the room was warm. Not fear. Recognition without understanding. Miriam noticed his expression but did not press him. Instead, she stood and carried her plate to the sink. At the doorway to the living room, she stopped. Her eyes settled briefly on the fireplace. For one suspended moment, the cheerful elderly librarian vanished, and Corbin saw the woman she must have been during some darker season of her life. August was good at staying, she said. Corbin said nothing. Miriam turned back toward him. My husband disappeared on a trail north of here in October of 1998. The words entered the room without ceremony. Her husband, she explained, had been a tall, rangy high school science teacher with sandy brown hair, a gentle manner, and the infuriating confidence of someone who had hiked the same mountains for 20 years, and therefore believed familiarity made them safe. He went out alone on a clear morning. Weather came in faster than forecast. Search teams found his pack the following day. They found him 2 days later. Too late. August and Ash had been part of the search. Miriam's gaze moved to Flint. Ash was quieter than yours. Flint can be quiet. She looked at Corbin. He's been listening to us for 20 minutes. Corbin glanced toward the doorway. Flint had not moved. Miriam continued. When the search ended, everyone went home because there was nothing left to do. Her voice remained steady, which made the grief in it heavier rather than lighter. August didn't. Corbin watched her hands. The fingers had tightened once around the edge of the counter. He sat in my kitchen until morning. Didn't offer wisdom. Didn't tell me God had a plan. Didn't tell me time would fix anything. What did he say? Miriam looked through the open window toward the river. He said, "We can't always bring them back, Miriam, but nobody should have to wait alone." For several seconds, only the river filled the room. Corbin had heard countless sentences about loss. Some were written by people paid to comfort, some by chaplains, some by commanders, some by men who believed grief could be defeated if enough discipline were applied to it. August's sentence was different. It promised almost nothing. Maybe that was why Corbin believed it. When Miriam finally left, Flint watched her Subaru disappear between the trees. Corbin remained on the porch with one hand resting against the stone column. He had inherited the cottage from a man he barely remembered. But the more he learned about August, the less accidental the inheritance felt. That thought bothered him, because Corbin did not believe much in fate. He believed in preparation, consequence, human error, weather training, probability, and the brutal arithmetic of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Fate had always seemed like a word people used after the outcome was known. Still, that afternoon, when he walked back into the living room, the fireplace seemed less like part of an old house, and more like a question somebody had been waiting for him to ask. He did not start with a hammer. He started with smoke. The chimney needed inspection anyway. Corbin cleaned the firebox, checked the visible flue, then twisted several sheets of old newspaper loosely together and lit them near the grate to watch the draft. Smoke rose properly. Then Flint stood. The movement was sudden enough that Corbin turned. The German shepherd had been resting several feet away. Now both ears were forward, amber eyes fixed not on the flame but on the floor beside the right edge of the fireplace. "What?" Flint stepped closer. He lowered his head. A tiny flake of ash drifted across the hearth. Instead of rising with the warm draft, it slid sideways along the floor, toward the wall. Corbin went still. Another pale fragment followed. It disappeared into a narrow seam between the stone facing and the floorboards. Corbin extinguished the newspaper. He knelt, placed 2 fingers near the seam. There, faint, cool air, not coming out, being pulled inward. The wall was breathing. Corbin sat back on his heels. Flint looked at him. "This time," Corbin murmured, "I saw it too." He spent the next hour examining the stonework before removing anything. Most of the fireplace was genuine structural masonry, but the lower right section had subtle differences in mortar color. Repairs, perhaps, or deliberate concealment. Corbin fetched hand tools. One stone facing came free, then another. Behind them was not open cavity, but a narrow steel plate. He cleaned years of dust from its surface and found a recessed handle. No lock, no marking. He tested it. Nothing. Then he noticed a small mechanical latch at the bottom. He released it. The steel plate shifted inward half an inch. Corbin stood, repositioned, and pulled. A section of what had appeared to be stone wall moved slowly toward him on reinforced hinges, its masonry facade built over a steel frame. Cold air spilled from darkness behind it. Flint stepped forward. Corbin put one hand across the dog's chest. No. A narrow concrete staircase descended beneath the cottage. The smell rising from below was mineral and metallic. Damp concrete, old iron, cold earth. Corbin shone his flashlight down. 10 steps visible, perhaps more. No movement, no sound except distant water. He did not go down immediately. Confined spaces killed experienced people precisely because experienced people sometimes mistook confidence for permission. Corbin opened 2 windows, allowed the hidden space to ventilate, then went to the truck for a compact multi-gas monitor he kept among his industrial consulting equipment. Several security contracts had taken him into warehouses, utility tunnels, and partially enclosed plants. The meter had become part of the kit he carried without thinking much about it. Oxygen level acceptable. No alarming combustible gas reading. No dangerous carbon monoxide. Only then did he put on gloves, take 2 lights, a length of cord, chalk, and the old military watch he never removed. Flint waited. Corbin clipped the dog's dark olive harness properly and attached a short lead. "You stay behind me." Flint's expression suggested he considered this arrangement negotiable. "It isn't." They descended. The staircase ended in a concrete corridor beneath the cottage. Steel pipes ran overhead, some painted in colors long since faded into dull gray, green, and rust. Electrical conduit tracked one wall. The floor remained surprisingly dry except for isolated dark patches near pipe joints. Corbin swept his light across a rectangular metal sign. White letters remained visible beneath decades of grime. Alder Falls Auxiliary Control. Access 2, he read it twice. The cottage was not built over a basement. It was built over infrastructure. The corridor continued about 60 feet before splitting. One branch turned left and narrowed. The other descended slightly to the right. Flint stopped at the junction. His nose lifted, then his head turned sharply left. The German Shepherd stood completely still. Corbin felt no air movement at first. Then a faint vraff touched the back of his hand. Left side. He looked at Flint. Open route? Flint took one step toward it. Corbin followed. The passage narrowed steadily. After 20 yards, exposed conduit disappeared. The walls became rougher. Air moved more strongly. Corbin interpreted that as proximity to another opening. He kept going. 20 minutes later, the passage ended at an old masonry seal. No exit, no chamber, no hidden room, nothing. Only a narrow maintenance duct above the sealed section through which outside air was evidently entering. Corbin stared at the dead end. Flint sniffed the bottom corner. You led us to ventilation. The dog looked up. Corbin felt irritation rise before recognizing how stupid it was. Flint had not promised an exit. He had not pointed at a sign. He had detected moving air. Corbin had supplied the story. That bothered him more than the wasted time. For years, reading Flint had been part of staying alive. But good handlers did not turn dogs into oracles. They observed behavior, understood training, and separated what an animal detected from what a human hoped it meant. Corbin crouched. My mistake. Flint panted once. Don't enjoy it. They returned to the junction. This time Corbin chose the right-hand passage because of construction logic, not because Flint favored it. The corridor sloped downward several feet before widening. At the far end, a large steel door emerged from the concrete. Corbin stopped well short of it. The door was industrial, thick, reinforced at the hinges, with a wheel-style locking mechanism that had not been designed for residential use. His flashlight passed over faded black lettering. A17. Corbin's face tightened, the same designation as the brass marker outside. At the base of the door ran a narrow dark stain. He crouched to inspect it. Moisture. Not flowing water. No active leak. The concrete around it remained firm. Flint sniffed the air but did not approach the door. Then somewhere overhead. Tap. Corbin froze. A second strike traveled through the pipework. Tap. Then the third. Tap. Louder down here. Flint's ears snapped toward the ceiling. Corbin followed the line of the pipe with his light. The sound was not originating in the wall above. It was traveling through the system. He checked his watch. Late afternoon. They had already been underground long enough. He had no engineering drawings, no knowledge of what pressure might exist beyond the door, and no reason to open heavy hydraulic infrastructure simply because curiosity demanded it. Out. Flint turned immediately. By sunset, Corbin had made a decision. He needed records before tools. The following morning, he drove into Alder Ridge. The county archives occupied part of an old civic building constructed from pale brick, with narrow windows and a flagpole that leaned slightly away from the street. Corbin spent hours moving through property surveys, water district maps, engineering reports, and microfilmed documents that smelled faintly of dust and warm plastic. A project name finally surfaced in a 1962 map index. He pulled the corresponding oversized drawing onto a flat table. Across the top, Alder Falls run-of-river experimental diversion system. The plan showed an intake structure upstream, buried control lines, maintenance access routes, and several areas marked with letter number designations. One of them sat beneath the Bellamy property, A17. Corbin traced the system with one finger. At the bottom corner of the drawing, a later county stamp read, Decommissioned, 1974. He leaned back. That should have been the end of it. A dead utility system beneath an old engineer's house. Interesting, perhaps. No more than that. Then he noticed handwriting along the margin of a photocopied maintenance sheet attached behind the plan. The letters were old and thin but deliberate. Corbin recognized August's hand from the note that had brought him here. 4 words. Not dead, just forgotten. Corbin stared at them until the archive room seemed unusually quiet. He had arrived at Alder Falls intending to spend a few days calculating what the land was worth. Now he folded his hands on the edge of the table and understood that he was not ready to sell anything. Not yet. First, he needed to understand why a hydraulic system declared dead more than 50 years ago was still breathing beneath August Bellamy's house. The oldest engineering sheets had not been filed by importance. They had been filed by habit. Corbin learned that by mid-morning. Dates wandered between folders. Revision pages had been tucked behind property surveys. Several inspection forms contained signatures more useful than the reports themselves. Because the men who had once understood Alder Falls better than anyone were now either dead or old enough that no current county employee recognized their names. Corbin copied 6 of them into his notebook. One appeared repeatedly, Elias Mercer. The earliest signature belonged to a junior water systems engineer. Later reports showed the same name beside inspection notes, diversion calculations, valve schedules, and finally a county retirement document almost a decade old. Corbin found an address outside Alder Ridge through a public directory and drove there after lunch. Flint rode behind him, alert but relaxed, the old dark olive working harness fitted around his black and tan body. Morning exercise had taken the edge off the dog's energy. His amber-brown eyes followed the forest beyond the window, while Corbin followed an increasingly narrow road through cedar and alder. Elias Mercer lived in a small cedar-sided house above a creek, with a workshop leaning slightly behind it and 3 rain gauges mounted beside the fence. Corbin noticed the gauges before the man. Then the front door opened. Elias Mercer was 64, tall enough to have once looked lanky and now simply lean, with narrow shoulders, long forearms, and the slightly folded posture of someone who had spent decades bending over drafting tables and equipment housings. His hair was silver white and thinning at the crown but still thick around the sides. A pair of rectangular reading glasses hung from a cord against his faded green work shirt. His face was long and bony, with a sharp nose, deep-set brown eyes, and a neatly trimmed gray mustache over a mouth that seemed naturally skeptical. He walked with a slight unevenness in his left leg. The stiffness came from a replaced knee. As Corbin learned later, the legacy of 40 years climbing access ladders, concrete spillways, and mountain service roads before a fall on winter ice finished what time had started. Eli looked first at Corbin, then Flint, then the county copy in Corbin's hand. His expression tightened before Corbin said anything. "You're Bellamy's man," Eli said. Corbin stopped at the bottom step. "I'm Corbin Thayer. I know who you are." That was not hostile. It was not welcoming either. Eli's attention moved to the folded engineering sheet. "Where did you get that?" "County records." "Then put it back." Corbin glanced at the house. "You always answer questions before people ask them, only the expensive ones." Flint sniffed the air near the porch. Eli studied the dog more carefully. Something in his face changed. Not softness. Recognition. "Military?" "Retired." "You or him both," Eli grunted. "That never works." Corbin almost smiled. "I'm noticing." He unfolded the sheet just enough for the project title to show. Eli's eyes stopped on it. The humor disappeared. Corbin said only one thing, A-17. Eli turned away. For several seconds, he looked toward the creek below his property. "You should leave that buried." "It isn't buried." Eli faced him again. Corbin watched the old engineer process the sentence. Not surprise alone, fear threaded through it. Not fear of immediate danger, fear of something remembered. "Come inside," Eli said. The kitchen looked like the home of a man who had never stopped being an engineer. A barometer hung beside the refrigerator. Graph paper covered one end of the table. A disassembled brass pressure gauge occupied a tray near the sink. Books stood in uneven stacks along the walls: hydrology, watershed management, hydraulic structures, regional geology. Flint lay near the back door after Eli wordlessly pointed to a spot where his boots would not block the walkway. The gesture amused Corbin. Eli apparently organized dogs the way he organized equipment. Corbin placed photographs of the underground access corridor and A-17 door on the table. Eli put on his reading glasses. For almost a minute he did not speak. Then he removed them again. "That corridor was supposed to be filled." "It wasn't. I can see that." "What was A-17? Eli leaned back slowly. "A control section. That doesn't tell me much. It tells you exactly as much as I intended." Corbin waited. Silence had always been useful. Most people rushed to fill it. Eli lasted almost 30 seconds. Then he sighed. The original Alder Falls project was small, experimental by later standards, run-of-river hydroelectric generation, no giant reservoir. Water was diverted from upstream through a tunnel, passed through a turbine house lower in the valley, then returned to the river. Why under August property? The house wasn't the point, the access was. Eli traced an invisible line across the table. The terrain gave them a maintenance route through the rock. Bellamy bought the property later. He liked being close to the machinery. That sounds like him. You barely knew him. Corbin did not react. Eli noticed. The old engineer looked away first. The project had been shut down after flooding in 1974, damaged equipment, altered part of the channel, and made further investment difficult to justify. New county infrastructure and state-level water management eventually took over the functions people actually needed. The little experimental system became obsolete. Sections were dismantled. Others were supposedly sealed. "Supposedly?" Corbin asked. Eli's jaw shifted. There were disagreements. August? Always August. That answer carried more affection than Eli seemed willing to admit. August had argued that completely abandoning every part of the old system was wasteful. Some bypass passages could still relieve pressure or move water during unusual events. County officials saw maintenance costs, liability, outdated infrastructure, and miles of concrete nobody wanted responsibility for. Bureaucracy won, or appeared to. Corbin slid another document across the table. Eli did not need to read it. He recognized his own signature. His shoulders sank a fraction. I was 32. Corbin said nothing. Eli touched the page with 2 fingers. This report certified the lower tunnel permanently decommissioned. Was it? I thought it was. That isn't what I asked. Eli's brown eyes sharpened. For a moment, Corbin saw the younger man he must once have been. Proud, technically precise, impatient with anyone who questioned the work. Then the anger collapsed inward. No, the word was quiet. I never went down there myself. A regional supervisor had provided documentation stating the lower sections had been sealed and grout-filled after a contractor completed the work. Eli verified paperwork, measurements from accessible sections, and invoices. Then he signed. August refused. He told me a signature is supposed to mean you saw what you're willing to swear is true. Eli stared at the report. I told him engineering couldn't function if every engineer personally crawled inside every structure. What did he say? That it couldn't function very long if none of them did. Corbin almost heard August's voice in the answer. What happened between you? We stopped speaking except when required. Eli rubbed the bridge of his nose. Pride has a long shelf life. Corbin looked at the old man across from him. There were wounds that came from explosions, bullets, bad landings, and collapsing buildings. Others arrived quietly through decisions a person had enough time to reconsider and did not. Those often lasted longer. Corbin gathered the papers. Eli frowned. That's it? I have the answer I needed. You came here to accuse me? No. Then what? Corbin stood. I came to find someone who understands the system. He looked directly at Eli. You want to see what you signed off on? The old engineer's face became still. Outside, Flint rose before either man moved toward the door. Eli stared at the German shepherd. You always bring him when it makes sense. And underground makes sense, only if the conditions do. Eli nodded once. Good answer. He took a canvas field jacket from a hook. Give me 20 minutes. The return to Alder Falls took less than an hour. Eli spoke little during the drive. At the cottage, he stood in the yard and stared at the distant waterfall before looking at the stone house. I haven't been here in 27 years. Corbin did not ask why. Some answers became weaker when forced. They prepared carefully. Eli brought a handheld manometer, old-style inspection flashlight, gloves, and several small tools. Corbin checked the atmosphere again before entry and kept Flint on a controlled lead. The old engineer inspected every landing and pipe support, as though each one carried a personal accusation. At A17 he stopped. His fingertips touched the steel door. Bellamy painted this wheel red. Corbin looked at the nearly blackened locking wheel. Looks brown. It was red. Eli crouched beside the lower seal and examined the moisture. Ground seepage. Maybe condensation too. Nothing here suggests pressure behind the door is trying to force it open. Good. Good enough to inspect. Not good enough to guess. Corbin appreciated the distinction. Eli showed him a small pressure equalization valve partly hidden behind a guard plate. They tested it first. No sudden discharge. No violent pressure change. Only after several checks did Eli begin working the wheel. It resisted. Corbin stepped closer. Need help? I need 30 years back in my shoulders. You don't have that. I noticed. Corbin added, steady force. The wheel moved. Metal complained deep inside the frame. Flint's ears shifted toward the sound, but he stayed where Corbin had positioned him. Together they released the locking dogs. Eli pulled the door inward several inches. Cold, dry air moved past them. He waited, listened, then opened it farther. Their lights entered the room. The chamber beyond was larger than Corbin expected, perhaps 30 feet across and twice as long. Thick pipes emerged from concrete walls. 2 enormous valve wheels stood near a control manifold. Dust-coated old analog gauges, their glass faces yellowed with age. Steel cabinets lined one wall. A heavy workbench sat under a faded emergency diagram. An old radio rested on a shelf. So did things that did not belong in a decommissioned hydraulic station. Folded wool blankets, sealed first aid supplies, rescue rope, water containers, cans of food, battery lanterns, an old coffee pot. Corbin swept his light across them. August. Eli nodded. He never stopped. The meaning of Miriam's phrase settled differently now. The station. Not because it had once generated power, because someone had remained at it. August had converted the forgotten chamber into something between a maintenance post and emergency shelter. Dates written on supply boxes showed he rotated food and batteries well into old age. There were notes taped to a cabinet. 2 blankets used trail crew, November 2007. Replace splint kit. Radio battery weak and cold. Leave the south cabinet unlocked during winter. No drama. No signatures demanding recognition. Just evidence of usefulness repeated over years. Corbin felt an unexpected pressure in his chest. August had not waited for an institution to tell him the station mattered. He had simply continued making it matter. Eli stood beside the old radio. He used this place during storms. You knew? I suspected. You never came? Eli looked down. No. That single answer said enough. Corbin moved toward the rear manifold. A faint metallic movement sounded through one pipe. Eli immediately looked up. He followed the line with his flashlight to a narrow linkage disappearing into a wall chase. There you are. He removed a small inspection cover. Behind it, a long metal arm connected to an old pressure relief indicator. The joint had worn loose. Eli gently moved it. The arm touched a stop plate. Once, then again, then a third time as the spring returned. Corbin understood. Pressure changes move the linkage, and the wear lets it bounce 3 times. Eli nodded. Probably more noticeable at night when everything else is quiet. Flint stood several feet away watching them. Corbin looked at him. No ghost, no message from August. Only steel, water pressure, age, and a dog capable of hearing the small evidence long before Corbin knew what it meant. Strangely, the explanation did not make the place feel less mysterious. It made Flint more remarkable. Human beings had a habit of calling something supernatural when they did not yet understand the mechanism. Flint had never needed a story. He had only listened. Corbin moved along the cabinets. Most contained tools and old components. Flint followed at heel until they passed a low steel locker. The dog stopped. His nose touched the seam, then again. He inhaled longer. Corbin opened it. Inside lay a folded leather and canvas working harness, old, darkened by time. A brass buckle showed green oxidation. A leather strap had cracked near one edge but remained intact. Short dark hair still clung deep in one stitched seam. Flint leaned forward. His nose moved over them. Then he became very still. Behind the harness, Corbin found a photograph. August Bellamy stood beside Ash in front of the same control manifold, though both man and machine were decades younger. August looked to be in his mid-40s, tall and lean, sandy brown hair already showing gray at the temples. His long face was harder than the elderly version Corbin remembered, clean-shaven except for the uneven mustache, sleeves rolled above sinewy forearms. Ash stood beside him. The German Shepherd was perhaps 5 or 6 in the photograph, a powerful working-line male with a black saddle, rich tan legs and chest, upright ears, and deep brown eyes fixed somewhere beyond the camera. His body was athletic rather than bulky, his posture alert without tension. There was something almost familiar in the angle of his head. Flint stood beside Corbin in nearly the same position. Corbin turned the photograph over. 4 words had been written in black ink. Ash, 1989, he heard the water first. Corbin read them twice, then Eli whispered behind him. I'd forgotten that picture existed. Corbin looked over. Eli's face had lost color. What happened in 1989? The old engineer took the photograph. For a while, he only held it. Then he sat on the edge of the workbench. There was a maintenance incident in the lower section. Rain had been heavy that autumn, Eli explained, though river levels were not considered dangerous. August brought Ash because he often kept the dog with him during solitary inspections. Ash had begun behaving strangely near one section of the lower passage, stopping, listening, refusing to follow August past one point. August assumed the dog could hear rodents in the wall or thermal contraction in the pipe supports. He ignored him? Corbin asked. For about 9 minutes. 9 minutes. Not long in an ordinary life. Very long when warning is already standing beside you. A pressure imbalance farther upstream sent a sudden surge through an old relief branch. It did not flood the entire tunnel, but enough water and debris struck the lower chamber to break a support and throw a maintenance technician across the floor. The injured man was named Thomas Keene, 26 at the time, a compact, strong young technician with curly dark hair, a broad open face, and the easygoing temperament of someone who believed competent people could solve nearly anything if given the right wrench. He suffered a broken leg and crushed 2 fingers but survived. According to Eli, Thomas later left utility work altogether and became a vocational school instructor, partly because the accident permanently changed his tolerance for confined industrial spaces. No one died, Eli said, but August blamed himself. Every day I knew him after that. Eli returned the photograph. He said Ash heard the change before any gauge showed it. Could have been vibration, probably. Flow noise, maybe. Corbin looked at Flint. The dog had lowered his nose to the old harness again. Eli continued. Bellamy didn't turn it into magic. That wasn't his way. He turned it into engineering. After the incident, August altered an emergency locking mechanism associated with one of the lower bypass controls. Human access to the release pin was poor in certain failure conditions, especially if debris blocked the main side. August added a braided canvas pull strap. The strap ran through a narrow maintenance crawl space, too narrow for an adult, large enough for Ash. Corbin looked back at Eli. He designed an emergency control for a dog. He designed redundancy. There was almost defensiveness in Eli's voice. Bellamy would have corrected you on the wording. Corbin smiled faintly. I'm beginning to know him. Eli opened another cabinet and removed a rolled schematic. The paper crackled as they spread it across the workbench. There, in handwritten revision notes dated after the 1989 incident, was the modification, auxiliary mechanical release extension. Below it, in August's handwriting, accessible from service crawl space, no mention of Ash, no sentimental explanation, just a practical change born from having nearly ignored the animal once. Corbin looked down at Flint. The sentence August had left him finally changed shape in his mind. It had never been a prediction. August had not somehow known Flint would uncover secrets or choose roads. He had simply lived long enough with one good working dog to learn humility. There were moments when the animal knew something first. The human responsibility was not blind obedience. It was attention. That distinction mattered, especially to Corbin. He had spent years trusting Flint in places where trusting the wrong signal could kill both of them. Yet only recently had he begun treating the dog's behavior like a message that required interpretation rather than information requiring judgment. Maybe retirement had made him hungry for meaning. He did not like that realization, but he respected it. Eli moved to the large wall map. Several lines had faded, but colored engineering pencils had preserved the main routes. He traced one tunnel from the original intake. Another passed beneath the ridge. Then his finger stopped at a section east of the main channel. That shouldn't still be open. Corbin stepped beside him. What is it? Old bypass. For the turbine, originally for control and emergency diversion during maintenance. Eli followed the line to an abandoned spill channel farther downslope. If this route still exists, and that is a very large if, it could move water away from the lower river section. How much? Depends on gate condition, obstruction, head pressure, channel condition, 50 years of geology, and whether the drawing was ever accurate in the first place. That many qualifiers. I'm an engineer. Qualifiers are how we stay married. Corbin looked at him. You married, divorced twice. Corbin raised an eyebrow. Eli considered his own statement. Bad example. The humor died quickly when Eli continued studying the map. This was never the county flood control system. Corbin nodded. Important difference. A very important difference. There are modern protections elsewhere. River management changed decades ago. But this could still divert water, if it works. And August maintained it. Eli's gaze moved across the chamber. The stocked blankets, updated first aid boxes, repaired wiring, grease marks around several fittings. He maintained something. They did not attempt to operate the system. That would have been irresponsible without a full inspection. Instead, Eli photographed gauges, copied serial numbers, noted corrosion patterns, and tested only components that could be examined without changing hydraulic state. Corbin helped. Flint rested near the door after the excitement of the old harness, ears still tracking every faint sound in the chamber. While opening a drawer beneath the workbench, Corbin found several thick folders. Their labels meant nothing to him. Land agreements, insurance, tax correspondence, maps. 3 bore the same initials in black marker, AFC Trust. He flipped through the first pages. Legal language, conservation terms, property schedules. Nothing immediately related to the machinery. Corbin closed the folder. Know what AFC is? Eli glanced over. No. August Bellamy something? He never named things after himself. Corbin returned the folder. There were enough mysteries already. By late afternoon, Eli declared they had been underground long enough. The climb back to daylight felt shorter. When they stepped outside, warm sun spread across the terrace. The difference in temperature made Corbin blink. Flint moved ahead several yards, then stopped. Not near the drainage line, not near the porch. At the edge of the lawn facing upstream. He stood with his feet square beneath him, head lifted slightly toward Alder Falls. No growl, no bark, no attempt to pull Corbin anywhere. He simply listened. Corbin did not assign meaning to it. Not this time. He watched instead. The waterfall shone white between the distant trees. Alder River ran full beneath the afternoon sun. Eli came up beside him. The old engineer's face tilted toward the sound. Falls are carrying more water. Corbin looked at him. Problem? Not by itself. Eli studied the mountain slopes. We've had rain up high, and it warmed fast this week. Snowmelt will add to it. Normal explanations, ordinary hydrology, nothing that justified alarm. Still, Flint remained there for nearly a minute before finally turning away. Corbin looked once more toward the white water. That morning, A-17 had been a mystery left by a dead engineer. By afternoon, it had become something more complicated. It contained a mistake August had never forgotten, a lesson taught by a dog, a forgotten bypass nobody could yet prove still worked. And beneath all of it, water was still moving through a system the county had stopped thinking about half a century ago. Corbin had wanted an answer. Instead, he had found a reason to ask better questions. By 10 the next morning, Corbin had stopped pretending that selling Alder Falls would be simple. 3 folders covered the kitchen table. One contained the property deed. Another held county maps. The third was filled with notes Corbin had made while Eli Mercer talked through the portions of the old hydraulic system that still required verification. Flint slept beneath the open window. Sun warmed one side of the German Shepherd's black and tan coat while cool air moved through the room. Every few minutes, one upright ear rotated toward the river, then settled again. Corbin stood at the sink drinking coffee. 2 weeks earlier, the decision would have required less than 5 minutes. A stone cottage he had never asked for, 38 acres he did not need, a dead man's unfinished responsibilities. Sell it, sign whatever needed signing, drive back to Tacoma. Simple. Now the word felt dishonest. A vehicle came up the lane shortly before 11, not Miriam's Subaru. This was a dark gray SUV, clean enough that the dust gathering along its lower panels looked temporary. Corbin stepped onto the porch before it stopped. Flint woke and came outside beside him but remained slightly behind Corbin's left leg. The man who emerged from the SUV was 52 and carried himself like someone accustomed to entering rooms where every person had already read his name on an agenda. Graham Voss was just under 6 feet, broad through the chest without being athletic, with the solid build of a man who had once played sports and later replaced exercise with long drives, airport meals, and boardrooms. His dark blonde hair had receded cleanly at the temples and was cut short without trying to conceal it. Gray showed through a closely trimmed beard along his jaw. His face was square, with pale blue eyes, a straight nose, and a horizontal line between his brows that deepened whenever he concentrated. His clothes were expensive but chosen for the setting rather than display. Khaki field trousers, brown boots polished recently enough to reveal the effort, and a charcoal outdoor jacket over a white shirt without a tie. He carried a leather portfolio. No assistant, no photographer, no exaggerated smile. Corbin decided that made him more interesting. Mr. Thayer, Corbin, Graham Voss. He stopped several feet from Flint rather than reaching toward him. I was told there was a dog. There is. Does he object to strangers? He objects to poor judgment. Voss glanced at Flint. Useful standard. Corbin did not invite him inside yet. What can I do for you? Voss opened the portfolio. I represent Northvale Energy and Development. We've been working on a preliminary project east of Alder Ridge for about 18 months. Corbin had seen the name on 2 public notices in the county building, but had not paid attention. Voss handed him a printed map. The proposal combined a small eco-lodge development with trail improvements, limited recreational infrastructure, and a modern run-of-river energy component farther downstream. Nothing on the page looked monstrous. No enormous dam, no strip of luxury towers, no cartoon version of greed. Voss pointed to a line crossing the map. We need reliable service access from the county road to the ridge. The Bellamy parcel sits near the cleanest route. How clean? Engineering clean, not morally. Corbin looked at him. Voss gave the smallest smile. I've learned those are different conversations. The offer came 5 minutes later. $2.4 million for the cottage and most of the acreage, subject to title review and standard environmental conditions. Voss did not dramatize the number. He simply placed the written offer on the porch rail. Corbin looked at it. For the first time since August's letter arrived, the life he had expected to return to felt immediate. Tacoma, a quiet apartment, contracts when he wanted them. No underground concrete, no forgotten easements, no old engineer's unfinished questions. $2.4 million would turn an unexpected inheritance into a clean exit. A few weeks earlier, he would have taken it. That realization annoyed him, not because he wanted the money, because he no longer knew whether he wanted to leave. Flint moved to the shade and sat. Voss followed Corbin's gaze toward the river. Beautiful place. You say that like it's a complication. It usually is. Voss leaned against the porch post. He was not local to Alder Ridge, but he knew towns like it. He had grown up in a small timber community outside Coeur d'Alene, where his father managed machinery at a mill that closed when Graham was 17. Within 2 years, businesses disappeared from Main Street, families moved away, and his father, a proud man who had worked since 16, spent nearly a year unemployed. Voss had built much of his adult worldview around that memory. To him, development was not automatically destruction. Sometimes it was the thing that kept a town alive. "You look at a place like this," Voss said, "and see what shouldn't change. I look at towns like Alder Ridge, and remember what happens when nothing replaces the work that leaves." Corbin folded the offer once. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." "No." Voss seemed pleased by the answer. "That's why I'm here instead of sending a letter." Then Corbin asked the question that changed the tone. "Where exactly does your access work cross the ridge?" Voss opened another map. 3 geotechnical test points had been marked above the eastern slope. Corbin recognized the alignment. His attention sharpened. What kind of testing? Bore sampling, seismic reading, and 1 limited test blast if the rock profile requires it. When? Permit window opens in 48 hours. Corbin looked more closely. 1 test site sat uncomfortably near the projected line of the old underground works. "What does your file show beneath this section?" Voss answered without hesitation. "Nothing active." "Nothing active or nothing?" Voss's eyes narrowed slightly. He pulled another document. The county layer contained a faded note attached to the old Alder Falls project. Sealed, decommissioned, 1974. A later notation stated that obsolete sections had been grout-filled or otherwise made inaccessible. Voss tapped it. "We had this reviewed before applying." Corbin looked at the map again. "What if the record is wrong? Then we revise the plan. No defensiveness, no threat, just practical concern." Corbin watched him carefully. "You believe that?" "I believe damaged equipment. Lawsuits and dead workers are bad business." "That wasn't the question." Voss met his eyes. After a moment he said, "Yes." That answer complicated things further. Corbin could have preferred an enemy. Enemies simplified decisions. Voss was a man operating from bad information. That was more dangerous in some ways, and more human. Corbin handed back the map. "Don't start the test work yet." Voss's expression cooled. "I can't freeze a permitted schedule because a new property owner asks me to. There's infrastructure under this land that isn't sealed." This time Voss went completely still. "What infrastructure?" "Enough that you should want another engineering review." "Can you document it?" "Some of it." "Then document all of it." He closed the portfolio. "I'm not trying to bulldoze your house, Corbin. But I also have crews, contractors, state review dates, and investors who don't operate on instincts." Corbin glanced at Flint. "Neither do I." Voss followed his eyes but did not understand the private irony. 48 hours, he said. "That's the current permit window. If the county changes it, we comply." He returned to the SUV. Before getting in, he looked once more at the cottage. "You should think about the offer even if the access route changes." "I will." Voss nodded, then drove away. Corbin waited until the sound of the vehicle disappeared. Flint looked up. 2.4 million. The German shepherd yawned. "Good financial counsel." Corbin called Eli. 35 minutes later, the retired engineer arrived with maps rolled beneath one arm and irritation already visible on his face. "Test blasting? Limited." Blasting is one of those words that becomes less comforting when you put limited in front of it. They drove into Alder Ridge together. The county emergency management office occupied the 2nd floor of a modest administration building overlooking a public works yard. Naomi Reyes, 41, met them in a conference room. She was about 5'7", lean and athletic, with strong shoulders and the economical movements of someone who had spent years carrying weight over uneven ground. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a low braid. Sun had deepened her naturally warm olive-brown complexion, and a narrow pale scar crossed the outside of her right forearm. Her face was composed rather than severe, high cheekbones, a straight nose, dark hazel eyes that gave people the unnerving impression that she was listening to the part of the sentence they had chosen not to say. Before county emergency management, Naomi had spent 14 years as a wildland firefighter. A blow-up on a northern Washington fire had killed 2 members of a neighboring crew when shifting wind invalidated an evacuation model that everyone had trusted an hour earlier. Naomi had not caused the failure, but the experience permanently changed how she handled warnings. She did not panic early. She did not dismiss anomalies either. Most of all, she required evidence. Corbin appreciated that within 3 minutes. Naomi spread Eli's maps across the table. "So," she said, "you're telling me county records show a tunnel sealed 50 years ago, and you physically entered part of it?" "Yes," Corbin answered. "And your qualification for assessing underground hydraulic infrastructure is?" "Nen." Naomi looked up. Corbin added, "That's why I brought him." Eli, already wearing his reading glasses, raised one hand without looking away from the drawing. Naomi's mouth almost smiled. Almost. I was told you were a former Navy SEAL. I was. That does not make you a hydrologist. No, good, we'll get along. She turned to Eli. His explanation was careful. A 17 was real. Accessible portions remained open. The old county decommission record could not be fully accurate. More importantly, one of North Vale's proposed test points lay close enough to the projected underground alignment that vibration assessment was warranted before work continued. Naomi listened. Then she asked the question Corbin expected. Can you prove the tunnel extends beneath that specific ridge? Eli paused. Not yet. Can you prove the old bypass is structurally functional? No. Can you prove the proposed testing would damage it? No. Eli removed his glasses. That is why testing first would be idiotic. Naomi did not take offense. I agree that uncertainty needs review. I don't agree that uncertainty gives me authority to cancel another department's permit. She explained the process. Emergency management could request an accelerated hazard review. The county engineering office could issue an administrative hold if new information demonstrated credible infrastructure conflict. But Naomi herself could not simply call North Vale and order them away from permitted land. What do you need? Corbin asked. Location evidence, structural evidence, something signed by somebody willing to attach a professional license to it. Eli stared at the map. Corbin looked at him. Naomi noticed the exchange. You have 48 hours before their work window, Eli muttered. I had plans tomorrow. Naomi glanced at him. Were they better than preventing someone from drilling into a hydraulic tunnel? Dentist. Debitable. That time Corbin did smile. As they gathered the maps, Naomi stopped Corbin at the door. You haven't told me why you care. He looked back. The property is mine. That explains liability, not this. Corbin did not answer immediately. Through the conference room window, he could see the mountains beyond town. A month earlier, the truthful response would have been simple. He would have cared because damage complicated a sale. Now that answer no longer fit. I don't know yet. Naomi studied him. Then she nodded. That may be the first honest answer I've heard from a property dispute all year. On the drive back, the question stayed with him. Why did he care? He had spent 2 years telling himself that detachment was freedom. No permanent house. No obligations he could not carry in one bag. No promises that survived past the next contract. But detachment had gradually become another kind of discipline. One he had never consciously chosen. And now a place he had intended to sell was forcing him to notice the difference between being free to leave and having nowhere he wanted to stay. Before Corbin and Eli returned to the cottage, Corbin stopped at the law office handling August's estate. The attorney who had sent the original letter was Helen Marlowe, 58, a tall, slender woman with fair skin, shoulder-length chestnut hair threaded heavily with silver, and intelligent gray-green eyes behind narrow tortoise-shell glasses. She dressed plainly for an attorney, dark slacks, a blue blouse, flat shoes, and had the measured voice of someone who had spent 3 decades settling property disputes in rural counties, where handshakes, family history, water rights, and recorded documents often disagreed with one another. Helen had represented August during the last 12 years of his life. She described him as meticulous about things nobody else noticed and infuriatingly vague about things everyone wanted explained. Corbin believed that immediately. He placed the old parcel documents on her desk. Tell me what I actually inherited. Helen adjusted her glasses. The cottage and land are straightforward. That means the rest isn't. It means the rest was written by an engineer who hired 3 lawyers because he trusted none of us individually. She pulled several recorded instruments. The first was a historical water rights certificate authorizing limited diversion associated with legacy infrastructure. Corbin frowned. So I own part of the river. No, Helen's answer was immediate. You do not own the water in Alder River. You hold a vested right, subject to conditions, to divert a specified amount under a recorded use. Good. You sound relieved. I didn't want a river. Too much maintenance. The second document was a maintenance easement preserving legal access to portions of old hydraulic infrastructure crossing or adjoining the Bellamy property. The third was an emergency access covenant allowing inspection and limited emergency operation under defined conditions. Helen leaned back. August preserved these deliberately. Why? He never gave me one answer. What answer did he give you? That people are very good at abandoning things and very bad at predicting when they'll need them again. Corbin looked at the documents. If the old tunnel is still functional, then anyone proposing work that could materially affect it will need to address the recorded rights and easements. North Vale, Helen nodded. That does not automatically defeat their project. It means they cannot pretend the infrastructure doesn't exist. Once again, August had done something that appeared eccentric until the moment it mattered. Corbin disliked how often that was happening. That afternoon, the urgency temporarily dissolved. Eli stayed at the cottage to compare archived measurements against the accessible underground sections. Miriam appeared with a thermos of coffee and 4 mismatched mugs, although there were only 3 people. When Corbin mentioned it, she looked at Flint. He has better manners than several men I know. He shouldn't have coffee. Then you can have his. They sat beneath the oak. For nearly an hour, nobody discussed North Vale. Miriam told a story about August repairing a neighbor's frozen water line during a Christmas dinner and returning 3 hours later furious because everyone had eaten the pie. Eli claimed August had been furious because they had eaten the good pie. Miriam insisted there had only been one. The argument became unexpectedly serious. Corbin listened. Flint lay in the grass with his head between his paws. Sunlight moved across his back. The river below carried light between stones, and Alder Falls stood bright in the distance. The cottage behind them no longer looked neglected. Corbin had rehung the kitchen cabinet, cleared the north gutter, reset another porch tread, repaired a window latch. Small things, temporary things, he had told himself. Except temporary repairs did not need to be done well enough for next year, and Corbin had done them that way anyway. He looked at the porch. A thought came quietly. He had begun fixing the place as though he expected someone to use it tomorrow. Maybe himself. Flint stirred. The German shepherd rolled onto his chest and pushed upward. His front legs straightened immediately. His hindquarters followed a fraction late. Just one extra effort, barely visible. Miriam continued talking. Eli poured more coffee. Nobody else noticed. Corbin did. Of course he did. He had watched Flint leap into helicopters, clear obstacles in darkness, run miles without hesitation. He had trusted that body in places where both of them had been younger and foolish enough to mistake endurance for permanence. Now a single delayed movement in warm grass hit Corbin harder than it should have. Flint stood, stretched one rear leg, then walked over as if nothing had happened. Corbin placed his hand against the dog's neck. Warm fur, strong muscle, steady pulse. Flint looked up at him. There was no tragedy in the animal's face, only the present. Corbin realized dogs were better at that too. Humans saw gray hair and immediately imagined the funeral. Dogs felt sunlight and lay down in it. "Everything okay?" Miriam asked. Corbin rubbed Flint behind one ear. Yeah, and it was, for now. That was the part he needed to learn how to live inside. By early evening, Eli had spread old decommissioned paperwork over the kitchen table. One line mattered most. Lower diversion sections filled and sealed with grout. Beneath it was Eli Mercer's younger signature. He stared at it for a long time, then placed beside it a current photograph showing an open concrete passage that the report claimed did not exist. "You could say the contractor record was wrong," Corbin said. "It was. You could say you relied on it." "I did." "You could say you followed procedure." Eli looked at him. "That's what I said for 30 years. Corbin understood. This was not a technical argument anymore. Eli opened a blank document on his laptop. "What are you doing?" "Something I should have done the first time." He began drafting a preliminary engineering statement. The language was cautious, professional, no dramatic claims. The accessible infrastructure physically contradicted the historical decommission record. The projected alignment presented a plausible conflict with proposed geotechnical work. Further investigation was warranted before drilling or test blasting occurred within the affected zone. At the bottom, Eli entered his professional credentials and current consulting status. He stared at the signature line, then signed. Corbin said nothing. Some moments deserved witnesses more than congratulations. Eli sent the statement to Naomi in the county engineering office. At 6:42 p.m., Naomi called. "The issuing office has enough for a temporary administrative hold while engineering reviews the conflict." Eli closed his eyes briefly. "North Vale? Notified." "How angry?" "Professionally." Corbin leaned against the counter. "For how long? Long enough to inspect, not long enough to relax." Then Naomi's voice changed. "I also got an updated weather bulletin." Corbin straightened. What changed? High elevation rainfall over the last 3 days was heavier than the first gauges showed. Temperatures are running well above seasonal average. Eli moved closer to the phone. "Snowpack coming off fast. Any flood advisory?" "Not yet." Naomi was careful with the words. "There is no current basis for evacuation. No emergency order. I'm increasing upstream monitoring and asking Public Works to watch tributary gauges." Corbin looked through the kitchen window. The evening outside was almost offensively beautiful. golden light across cedar trunks, clear sky between the mountains, the river bright beneath the terrace. Nothing in the landscape looked dangerous. Perhaps that was why Naomi's next sentence remained with him. "People expect bad things to arrive looking bad," she said. "Mountains don't work that way." The call ended. Eli walked onto the porch. Corbin followed. Flint came behind them and settled near the top step. No one spoke for a while. They had stopped North Vale's work temporarily. They had corrected one old mistake. They had bought time. But far above Alder Ridge, rain had fallen onto warm snow. Water was leaving the mountains. And unlike permits, deeds, signatures, and property lines, it did not care who had authority. The morning looked too beautiful to carry a warning. Sunlight entered Alder Ridge through long openings in the forest, catching on wet cedar bark and turning the leaves of the alders almost translucent. The heavy rain that had fallen higher in the mountains had never reached the cottage with the same violence. Down in the valley, the sky was blue, the air cool, and Alder River reflected the light in shifting bands of silver. If Corbin had known only what his eyes showed him, he would have called it a good day. He had learned not to trust beauty that completely. Still, there was nothing dramatic enough to justify fear. No emergency sirens, no brown floodwater, no trees moving where they should not. Only a river carrying more water than it had the week before and snow disappearing rapidly from slopes far above the valley. Corbin fed Flint before 7. The German shepherd ate normally, drank, and stood near the kitchen door while Corbin made coffee. At 8 years old, Flint remained lean and powerful, the black saddle across his back glossy in the morning light, warm tan coloring visible along his chest and legs. The few silver hairs around his dark muzzle seemed more obvious to Corbin now that he had begun noticing them. That irritated him. Not the gray, the noticing. Once the mind admitted something could be lost, it began collecting evidence. Corbin refused to let himself turn Flint's age into a countdown. He clipped the familiar dark olive working harness around the dog's body. "We need hardware." Flint's ears rose. That wasn't an invitation to reorganize the day. The dog moved to the truck. Corbin sighed. Apparently it was. He needed screws, sealant, 2 electrical connectors for a porch light, and replacement line for one of the old utility reels Eli had asked him to inspect. The trip into Alder Ridge should have taken less than 20 minutes. The small bridge over Alder Creek changed that. It was an old timber and steel county bridge barely wide enough for 2 vehicles, built across a narrow tributary several miles below the cottage. Alder Creek usually ran quietly beneath it, clear water passing over rounded stone and fallen branches. Corbin slowed as he approached. Flint, sitting secured in the rear, suddenly stood. Corbin saw the movement in the mirror. The dog's posture changed completely. Not excitement, not scenting deer. Flint stared through the passenger side window. Corbin stopped before reaching the bridge. What? Flint did not look at the structure that mattered. The German shepherd's amber-brown eyes were fixed on the steep forested slope to the right of the road. His ears angled forward, his mouth closed. His entire body became still. Months earlier, Corbin might have interpreted the reaction too quickly. Danger, a route, a message, some answer waiting inside the dog's behavior. He had made that mistake underground already. So Corbin did nothing for several seconds. He observed. Flint's nose was not working hard. This was not scent. His attention stayed higher than the road. Sound. Corbin lowered the window. At first, there was only creek water and birds. Then, tick, a stone bounced through brush somewhere above them. Another followed. Then a faint hiss of disturbed soil. Corbin shifted the truck into reverse. He backed 30 yards. Flint remained standing. The hillside looked unchanged. Sunlight passed through fir branches. A squirrel crossed a log. For nearly 2 minutes, nothing happened. Corbin began wondering if he had overreacted. Then a narrow shelf of earth roughly 20 feet above the roadway gave way. It happened without drama. Roots tore. A section of soaked soil slumped downward, carrying stones, branches, and one young alder with it. The debris crossed the road where Corbin's truck would have been. Most of it stopped before the bridge. No enormous landslide. No destroyed highway. Just perhaps 15 cubic yards of soil and rock spread across the pavement. Enough to crush a hood, enough to push a vehicle sideways. Enough. Flint lowered himself back onto the seat. Corbin stared through the windshield. There was no triumph in the dog's face, no awareness that he had saved anyone. He had heard a hillside moving. That was all. Corbin reached back and rested one hand briefly against Flint's shoulder. Good catch. Flint licked once at the air and looked toward the road ahead. For some reason, that ordinary response affected Corbin more than if the dog had barked dramatically. Animals did not need their warnings to mean anything beyond the moment. Humans were the ones who built destinies afterward. Corbin called Public Works and reported the slide. Then he called Naomi. Her first question was not whether he was safe. Which bridge? He told her. A pause. That slope was inspected last fall. Then it's wetter than it was last fall. I was afraid you'd say that. By the time Corbin reached town using an alternate road, the weather had become the primary subject inside the county offices. Naomi had moved from her smaller office into the emergency operations conference room, where 3 computer monitors displayed river gauges, precipitation totals, snow water equivalent, and regional radar. Another woman stood beside the largest screen. Dr. Lena Park, 38, was the county's consulting engineering geologist. She was short, perhaps 5 feet 3, with a compact frame built from years of carrying field gear over steep ground. Her straight black hair was cut just below the jaw and tucked behind one ear. She had warm beige skin, dark almond-shaped eyes, and a small pale scar along the left side of her chin from a rockfall incident years earlier. She wore hiking trousers, a charcoal field shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and mud on both boots despite the dry streets outside. Lena spoke quickly when discussing geology and slowly when discussing consequences. That difference told Corbin more about her than an introduction would have. She had spent 12 years mapping unstable slopes and post-fire debris flows throughout Washington. A close friend and graduate school colleague had been killed during a field survey in Montana when a seemingly minor slope collapse accelerated unexpectedly. Since then, Lena had developed an almost stubborn resistance to dramatic certainty. She rarely said something would happen. She said what conditions allowed. Naomi pointed at Corbin. Bridge slide. Lena looked up immediately. Fresh, 20 minutes ago. Shallow translational or rotational, Corbin considered. Top layer separated. Roots came with it, maybe 18 to 20 feet wide. Lena nodded. Likely shallow saturation failure. She turned back to the screen. That fits. With what? Corbin asked. Naomi enlarged a map of the upper watershed. Several tributaries feeding Alder River were running above normal seasonal flow. Nothing had yet crossed major flood thresholds, but multiple gauges were trending upward at the same time. The problem isn't one number, Naomi said. It's all of them leaning the same direction. Lena pointed toward the high country. 3 days of rain at elevation. Then a warm air mass moved in. Snowpack is releasing faster than the forecast model expected. Corbin studied the map. One small basin northeast of the main valley had been outlined in orange. What's that? Lena's expression changed. Something I'm not ready to call a problem. That usually means it might be. It means exactly what I said. Naomi folded her arms. Explain it. Lena zoomed in. The basin sat above one of the tributaries feeding Alder River. Decades earlier, a large natural landslide had crossed a narrow drainage and created a partial debris dam. Over time, sediment accumulated behind it, forming a small alpine pond or seasonal basin. It isn't a concrete dam, Lena said. It's rock, soil, root mass, and old slide debris. Stable? Stable enough to have been there for years. That isn't the same answer. Lena looked at him. No, it isn't. County staff monitored the basin seasonally because natural debris dams could change under heavy inflow. Most never failed catastrophically. Many developed minor seepage, shifted, eroded gradually, or found new outlets. But water behind the obstruction was now rising. How much? Corbin asked. Still within previously observed range. Naomi added, which is why we're monitoring, not evacuating. Corbin nodded. There was a discipline to doing nothing when nothing was yet justified. He understood that better than people assumed. The harder part was knowing when that moment ended. North Vale's temporary hold became a full suspension of geotechnical activity shortly after noon. Naomi did not make the decision. The county issuing office did, after reviewing Eli's statement and a preliminary surface survey that showed the projected tunnel alignment passing closer to the test zone than older maps indicated. Graham Voss arrived at the administration building less than an hour later. He was not pleased, but he was controlled. Corbin encountered him in the corridor outside Naomi's office. Voss carried a rolled plan set under one arm, his square face tightened around the mouth. Congratulations, he said. Corbin stopped. For what? You've shut down 18 people and about $60,000 of equipment. The county did, because of your tunnel. My tunnel wasn't supposed to exist, remember? Voss exhaled. He knew that was fair. Every day this sits, I lose money. Every day you don't drill into something you didn't know was there, you may save some. I'm not drilling into a tunnel, you hope. Voss looked toward the conference room. That's the part I hate about old infrastructure. Everybody knows exactly what happened 50 years ago until somebody opens a door. Corbin studied him. No crews go in? Not until the suspension lifts. No test blast? No. Voss's jaw tightened. I follow permits, Corbin. even when I hate them." Then he walked away. Corbin did not dislike the man. That was inconvenient. It would have been easier if Voss were dishonest. Instead, Corbin suspected Graham Voss genuinely believed A-17 was an obsolete machine standing in the way of economic development. Corbin himself had no proof that Voss was wrong. Not yet. That afternoon, Eli arranged a deeper inspection of the lower system. The county sent a technician to accompany them. Owen Pike, 31, was a water infrastructure maintenance specialist employed by Public Works. He was medium height and thick through the shoulders, with close-cropped light brown hair, a round face, and a short reddish-brown beard. His pale skin was permanently freckled from outdoor work, and his forearms carried small scratches that suggested he considered gloves optional more often than supervisors preferred. Owen possessed the calm, practical humor of a man comfortable around pumps, valves, mud, and equipment nobody noticed until it stopped functioning. He had grown up in Alder Ridge and spent 6 years working seasonal logging roads before moving into county utilities after an accident crushed his older brother's foot beneath a skidder. Watching how quickly a livelihood could disappear after one bad day had made Owen unusually serious about maintenance. "Everything breaks," he told Corbin while checking a radio battery. "The trick is making it break slowly enough that you notice." Eli looked at him. "Who taught you that?" "You. I regret several things already." The inspection team used 2 multi-gas monitors, radios, backup lights, helmets, harnesses, survey markers, water-level chalk, and independent safety lines. Flint accompanied them only through sections Eli had already considered structurally acceptable. Corbin did not treat the dog as equipment. That distinction mattered more now. The lower passages were colder than the upper control chamber. Condensation gathered along exposed metal. Several areas showed mineral deposits where groundwater had seeped slowly through concrete joints for years. Owen marked each one. No dramatic leaks, no rushing water, nothing that suggested immediate failure. They reached the bypass gate after nearly 40 minutes. It was larger than Corbin had expected. A steel gate assembly sat inside a reinforced concrete channel, connected through old mechanical linkage to a manual operating wheel and a secondary locking mechanism. Eli examined it in silence. Then he said, "Better than it has any right to be." Owen crouched beside the frame. "Corrosion? Surface. Some pitting. Nothing I can evaluate fully without cleaning." The gate itself appeared structurally intact. The locking assembly did not. Mineral deposits had built around one pivot point, and fine woody debris had entered through a narrow drainage gap. Owen tested a non-load-bearing part by hand. It barely moved. "Lock solid." "Not solid," Eli said. "Stubborn. Engineering distinction. Important one." They did not force it. Beyond the gate, a camera inserted through an accessible inspection opening showed the bypass channel continued into darkness. There was sediment, some collapsed small debris, but not a complete blockage. Corbin watched the camera feed. How much water could it move? Eli gave him a hard look. "Stop asking that like I owe you a number. You're an engineer. That's why I won't invent one." Owen smiled. Eli ignored him. "Capacity depends on available hydraulic head, actual channel dimensions, gate opening, obstruction downstream, friction loss, and whether 50 years of rock movement altered the spill channel. So potentially useful. Potentially. Could it reduce peak flow in the lower river? Yes. Could it save the town? No." Corbin looked at him. Eli pointed one gloved finger. "Do not turn this into that story. This system is not a magic lever. It is not designed to protect Alder Ridge from every flood. Modern evacuation routes, upstream monitoring, road closures, emergency crews. That's flood safety." He tapped the gate. "This is one old layer. Maybe a useful one. Nothing more." Corbin nodded. He respected Eli more for saying it. Heroes liked single solutions. Systems survived through redundancy. Corbin had spent enough time in war to know the difference. They took a break in the upper chamber while Owen logged measurements. Corbin opened one of August's maintenance notebooks. Most pages contained ordinary records, grease dates, valve positions, battery replacements, watermarks, hand-drawn corrections to old maps. Then a sentence appeared alone beneath an entry from the early 1990s. Corbin read it once, then again. At high river stage, lower Alder Ridge may have less than 45 minutes after an upstream release. There was no underline, no dramatic warning box, just August's careful handwriting. Corbin felt the room narrow around it. Eli leaned over, his expression sharpened. "Date?" Corbin showed him. Eli looked toward the old maps. That was probably based on travel time estimates from the upper tributaries. How accurate? Then, maybe reasonably good. Now, I wouldn't trust it without current flow data. "But it isn't nonsense." "No." Flint, resting several feet away, raised his head at the change in their voices. Corbin looked at him. For a brief moment, an uncomfortable thought crossed Corbin's mind. August had spent decades preparing for things nobody else expected to need. Emergency supplies, access rights, a bypass, a dog-accessible release. And now this number, 45 minutes. It would have been easy to turn August into a prophet. Corbin refused. Faith, he had learned, was not the same as superstition. August had not known the future. He had simply respected consequences enough to prepare before they arrived. Maybe that was its own form of belief. Belief that someone would eventually need what you maintained. Belief that doing the right thing still mattered even when nobody was watching. Corbin closed the notebook. Naomi needs this. Eli nodded. And if the upstream conditions change, I recalculate it. From scratch. The number remained in Corbin's mind long after they left the chamber. Not as a prediction, as a measure of how little time a beautiful valley might someday provide. Before returning upstairs, Corbin spent 20 minutes sorting one of the filing shelves. The initials AFC appeared again. More often now. A property tax letter, an insurance schedule, a conservation correspondence packet, a legal envelope with a law office stamp. One sheet referred to protected riparian acreage. Another referenced an endowment allocation without naming the amount. Corbin frowned. What exactly did you build, August? Owen heard him. What? Nothing. He put the files back. This was not the moment to chase another mystery. Still, the documents altered his sense of the cottage again. August had not simply hidden an old machine under his home. He had built layers around it. Legal, financial, environmental, operational. Corbin had spent his career understanding defensive depth. August seemed to have done the civilian version. They emerged in late afternoon. Naomi had asked Eli to send every useful measurement immediately. By early evening, Dr. Lena Park had added new watershed data. The Alpine Basin remained intact. No breach, no emergency. But something changed after sunset. Corbin was in the cottage kitchen when Naomi called. Eli was still there, sitting at the table with his laptop open. Flint lay near the doorway. Naomi did not waste time. We have an anomaly at the upper basin. Eli put the call on speaker. What kind? Water surface dropped. Corbin glanced at him. That sounds good. Lena's voice came through in the background. No. Then she came onto the line. The basin level dropped a few inches over the last measurement interval. Could be reduced inflow, Corbin said. If tributary flow below it hadn't increased at the same time. Silence. Eli leaned toward the laptop. Sensor error, we're verifying. Second gauge, downstream gauge confirms higher flow. Corbin pictured the map, water disappearing from behind a natural debris dam while more water appeared below it. Eli's face hardened. New outlet. Possibly, Lena said. Or seepage path. Possibly internal erosion. Another pause. Possible. Naomi took over again. No evacuation yet. We do not have evidence of imminent failure. Corbin agreed. The distinction mattered. What are you doing? Moving sheriff units closer to the low crossings. Public Works is staging barricades. Lena is sending a field crew toward the observation point at first light if conditions stay safe. I'm raising emergency readiness. Residents? Notifying the low river corridor that monitoring has increased. No evacuation instruction. Eli looked at Corbin. Neither man needed to say what the data suggested. The natural dam might simply have found a harmless new drainage path. Or water might be moving through it. And moving water had a talent for making small openings larger. After the call, Eli remained at the table for several minutes. The basin could stabilize. Corbin knew the sentence was partly for himself. Could. Natural dams leak all the time without collapsing. Could. Eli frowned. You're unpleasantly good at not reassuring people. I've had practice. They checked the newest gauge feed again. Tributary flow had increased slightly. Not enough to trigger an emergency threshold. Enough to notice. It was nearly midnight when Eli finally left. Corbin locked the cottage and turned off the kitchen lights. Flint had fallen asleep beside the front door. The German shepherd had worked longer than Corbin intended that day. His black and tan body lay curled partly against the cool stone floor, one ear relaxed sideways. The faded dark olive harness had been removed and hung nearby. Corbin crouched. He almost touched the dog's shoulder, then stopped. Flint was sleeping deeply. That had become rare enough that Corbin did not want to interrupt it. He sat on the floor beside him instead. For years he had wanted Flint alert, listening, watching, ready. In places where vigilance kept them alive, Corbin had trusted those ears more than his own. Now something had changed. He did not want Flint to hear the mountain. He did not want him to stand suddenly and stare toward the river. He did not want another warning. He wanted the dog to sleep. Just sleep. No mission, no command, no danger arriving first through an animal's senses. Corbin rested his back against the wall. Outside, the valley was dark and peaceful. The distant falls remained audible, low and constant. Closer, Alder River moved below the terrace. Corbin could not see it from where he sat, but he could hear that it was fuller, faster, water passing over stone with a heavier voice than the week before. Flint slept through it. Corbin was grateful. For tonight, at least, one of them could. Beyond the cottage windows, Alder River kept rising. At 6:17 the next morning, every useful number in Alder Ridge began moving in the wrong direction. Corbin was awake before the call came. He had slept badly on the sofa with Flint stretched near the front door, and sometime shortly before dawn he had given up, pretending that closing his eyes counted as rest. Outside, the eastern sky had only begun to pale above the mountains. The cottage was quiet except for the river below the terrace. It no longer sounded merely full. It sounded heavy. Corbin's phone vibrated across the kitchen table. Naomi Reyes. He answered immediately. "Go, we have a breach." Her voice was controlled, which made the words more serious. Corbin stood. Flint's head lifted from the floor. "Confirmed. Upper camera and 2 gauges. Lena has visual confirmation from the observation station. The natural debris dam had not exploded apart. A section near its eastern side had slumped during the night, opening a narrow channel through the packed soil, roots, and broken rock. At first, the water had escaped through a passage barely wider than a pickup truck. Then, erosion began enlarging it. By the time daylight reached the basin, the opening had nearly doubled. Water stored behind the landslide barrier was now accelerating through the gap and into the tributary below. Not the entire basin at once. That almost made it worse psychologically. A single dramatic collapse would have been obvious. This was progressive, measurable, growing, something that still looked manageable on one screen while becoming dangerous on another. "How much flow?" Corbin asked. "Ellie's running it now. I'm coming in." "Don't come to town. Go to A17. Owen is already headed your way. Eli will meet you there." Naomi paused. "Corbin?" "Yeah, we're past monitoring." The line went dead. He looked at Flint. The German Shepherd was already standing. No excitement, no nervous pacing, only readiness. Corbin hated how familiar that expression felt. He clipped Flint's old dark olive working harness around his body. The dog remained lean and strong, black and tan coat healthy despite the pale hairs gathering at his muzzle. His amber-brown eyes followed Corbin's hands while the buckles were checked. One rear leg stretched farther than the other when Flint stepped away. Corbin saw it. There was no time to resent it. "Easy today," he murmured. Flint's ears tilted toward him. Corbin did not know whether the promise was meant for the dog or himself. Eli Mercer arrived 17 minutes later in an old pickup that threw gravel against the grass. He climbed out before the engine fully stopped. The retired engineer looked older than he had the previous evening. His silver hair had not been combed. Reading glasses bounced against the front of his work shirt, and his replaced left knee made his first several steps stiff. But his eyes were awake, too awake. He carried a laptop, rolled maps, and a portable radio. Owen Pike followed in a county utility truck with helmets, rescue lines, portable floodlights, additional gas monitors, and a small equipment case. Eli opened his laptop on the cottage porch. "No coffee?" Corbin asked. "I've progressed beyond coffee." "To what regret?" Owen set down the equipment. "Breakfast of engineers." Nobody laughed very much. Live data populated Eli's screen. The upper tributary gauge climbed in uneven steps. A second station farther downstream confirmed the pulse moving toward the main Alder channel. Eli entered current discharge, recent velocities, estimated breach expansion, channel slope, and travel distance into a model simple enough to work quickly and conservative enough to be useful. He recalculated, then did it again. Corbin watched his face. "How long?" Eli did not answer. He changed one assumption, recalculated. Ellie, the old engineer, leaned back. 38 minutes on the aggressive model. Owen stopped unpacking. "And the other?" 43. Corbin looked toward the river. The old estimate he had seen in August's notebook returned to him without needing to be spoken. Not prophecy, geometry, water, distance, gravity. Someone had worked the problem years ago because someone might someday need the answer. Eli closed the laptop halfway. "The crest won't hit every point at once. Lower crossings see it first. Different tributary timing complicates the shape, but Alder Ridge has less than an hour." "Yes." Naomi's voice came over the radio. "All units, evacuation order is active for River Zone 1 and Lower Zone 2. Sheriff begins door-to-door immediately. Public Works closes Miller Bridge, South Creek Road, and the Old Mill Crossing. Shelter sites are the high school and St. Luke's." Corbin looked at Eli. It had begun. Alder Ridge did not panic. That surprised Corbin less than it might have surprised outsiders. Mountain communities lived close enough to fire, snow, river ice, wind, and falling trees to understand that evacuation was not surrender. It was logistics. Sheriff deputies moved first through the low residential roads. Public works trucks blocked crossings. School buses were redirected to collect residents without transportation. At St. Luke's, Miriam Bell stood beside a folding table with a printed call list and her cell phone. Her silver-gray hair had been tied back hastily, and she wore the same navy cardigan over a blouse despite the morning chill. At 72, her body was slender and no longer quick, but her voice remained clear. She called people by name, not addresses. People. Harold, take your medication bag. June, no, you do not have time to finish washing the dishes. Mrs. Larkin, Sheriff Bennett is coming to your driveway now. When someone told Miriam she should leave the phone work to younger volunteers, she replied that younger volunteers did not know which elderly residents pretended to hear better than they did. Nobody argued again. Naomi coordinated from the emergency operations room. Dr. Lena Park monitored the upper breach remotely while field personnel withdrew from unsafe observation points. The breach kept widening. No one person controlled what happened next. That was exactly why the response had a chance. Graham Voss called Naomi at 6:41. North Vale still had equipment staged outside the suspended work zone. An excavator, 2 heavy pickups, a flatbed, a portable generator, radios, barricades, and a crew that had expected to spend the morning waiting for engineering clearance. Voss did not ask whether the county would pay rental rates. He asked where the machines were needed. 20 minutes later, the excavator was clearing slide debris from the alternate high road access, while North Vale workers helped Public Works place temporary barriers near a drainage ditch already overtopping. Corbin heard the update over the radio while preparing the A-17 entry equipment. He glanced at Owen. Voss volunteered the excavator, apparently. Eli snorted. Now I have to dislike him less. Difficult morning. Terrible. A dark North Vale truck appeared at the far end of the cottage lane. Voss himself stepped out. His field jacket was open, beard untrimmed from the early call, pale blue eyes sharper than usual. I'm not staying, he said. Naomi sent me to ask if you need the generator. Owen looked at Eli. Eli nodded. Leave it. Voss signaled the driver behind him. Workers began unloading. Then Voss faced Corbin. You were right that the records were wrong. This isn't the time. No. Voss looked toward the swollen river. It might be the only time today. Corbin held his gaze. You still think the project belongs here? I still think towns need jobs. And I still think some places cost more than the numbers show. Voss nodded. Neither man had changed sides. That made the respect between them more believable. Voss turned to leave. Bring your dog back out. Corbin looked at him. Voss shrugged once. I'm not required to dislike him. Then he returned to the truck. Eli's next calculation concerned A-17. The answer took longer. He compared estimated bypass cross-section against the gate opening, sediment visible during inspection, downstream spill channel slope, current river stage, and the limited historical performance data August had preserved. Owen stood over his shoulder. Corbin waited. Finally, Eli straightened. If the gate gets close to full open and the spill channel takes what the model says it can take, we might shave enough off the crest to matter. How much is enough? Enough that I'm willing to recommend it. That answer carried more weight than any percentage. Naomi came over the radio. Define matter. Eli pressed the transmit button. Not dry streets. Not no damage. It could reduce the lower channel peak enough to limit structural loss in River Zone 1. Could it make things worse? If the spill channel fails, yes. Local erosion, possible damage east of the ridge. But that corridor is evacuated and largely undeveloped. Naomi asked another 6 questions. Eli answered all of them. Then she said, I need it in writing. Eli had expected that. He opened the emergency recommendation form. Corbin saw his hand pause over the keyboard. Decades earlier, Eli had attached his name to a conclusion he had never personally verified. That signature had followed him longer than some injuries followed soldiers. Now water was moving down the mountain and another signature waited. Owen stepped away from the screen. He understood the moment too. Eli reviewed every assumption once more. He adjusted the estimated blockage factor downward, ran the model, reviewed downstream exposure, checked the time, then typed his name, Elias Mercer, P.E. He signed digitally beneath it. No speech, no confession, just a man finally giving a signature the weight he believed it should always have carried. Naomi received the file. 30 seconds later, her reply came through. Emergency operation of A-17 authorized under Recorded Access Covenant and County Emergency Authority. Eli closed his eyes for one breath, then looked at Corbin. Now we earn the paperwork. Corbin changed nothing about the clothes beneath his safety equipment. The worn red and black flannel shirt remained over the light gray t-shirt. Faded dark blue jeans disappeared partly beneath the straps of a rescue harness. Old brown leather work boots were checked for traction. His military watch remained on his left wrist. Over that came what the tunnel required: helmet, headlamp, backup light, radio, main safety line, gloves. Owen secured the anchor system near the upper access point and ran redundant line. Flint's working harness received a short tether rated far beyond the dog's weight. Corbin checked each connection personally. Eli watched. "You don't have to take him all the way. I know. There may be another way to release the lock. Maybe." Flint stood between them, listening. Corbin crouched until his face was level with the dog's. For years he had given Flint commands that sent him toward things sensible animals avoided: dark rooms, unknown vehicles, gunfire, people who did not want to be found. Back then, risk had belonged to the job. Now Corbin found himself resenting the idea of asking anything dangerous from him again. Flint stared back. No nostalgia, no fear, only that same patient intelligence. Corbin put one hand against his neck. "We go until I say we stop." Flint's ears shifted forward. That was enough. The lower system sounded different from the previous day. Water moved somewhere behind the concrete, with a low continuous vibration that Corbin felt faintly through the soles of his boots. Eli remained at the upper control station where he could monitor available gauges and communicate with Naomi. Owen maintained the primary line from a safe intermediate position. Corbin and Flint moved toward the gate chamber. The first section remained dry, the second did not. A narrow stream had formed along one edge of the passage where seepage had increased. Corbin marked it mentally. "Ellie, water present at lower east joint, maybe half-inch across the floor. Copy. Keep moving only if level stays stable." Corbin proceeded. Flint moved slightly behind him, not because he was afraid, because Corbin had told him to. They reached the longer passage before the gate. Radio static increased. The background vibration became stronger. Then Flint stopped. Corbin took another half step before the tether tightened. He turned. Flint was staring upward, not forward, up. The German shepherd's mouth closed, ears fixed toward the ceiling. Corbin followed his gaze. Nothing visible. "Flint?" The dog shifted sideways toward the narrow maintenance ledge along the wall. Corbin did not ask why. He stepped with him. 3 seconds later, a piece of fractured concrete and stone, roughly the size of a toolbox, broke loose from the ceiling and struck the floor where Corbin had been standing. The impact echoed through the passage. Dust filled the beam of his headlamp. Eli's voice cracked through the radio. "What happened?" "Minor ceiling failure." "Are you hit?" "No." Corbin looked at Flint. "Neither of us." His pulse had increased, not from the falling stone, from recognizing the sequence. Flint had detected the vibration before visible failure, exactly the kind of information a human body could miss inside all the other noise. Corbin rubbed one hand once along the dog's shoulder. "Good." Then they moved. No mythology, no miracle, just trust earned long before Alder Falls. The gate chamber was already ankle-deep in water from increasing seepage and drainage return. Corbin reached the manual operating wheel, tested it. Nothing. He applied more force. The wheel moved perhaps a fraction of an inch, then stopped. "Ellie, I see no gate movement. Lock isn't fully released. Can you access the pin?" Corbin shone his light through the protective grate. There, beyond the mechanism, mineral-stained metal. A locking pin seated farther than it had appeared during inspection, and behind it, extending into the narrow service opening, the old braided canvas strap. Corbin stared. The strap looked absurdly ordinary, faded tan canvas, frayed fibers at one edge, a metal eye secured to a mechanical linkage August had altered decades earlier after learning one painful lesson from Ash. Corbin could see old tooth depressions in the canvas, not dramatic bites, working marks, evidence of training, use. For a moment, the years between Ash and Flint seemed to collapse. One dog had heard danger and been ignored. A man had spent the rest of his life changing a machine because of it. Now another dog stood beside Corbin in the same underground system while water moved toward the town above them. Corbin felt something dangerously close to fate. Then he corrected himself. Not fate, consequence. Ash had changed August. August had changed A-17. A-17 had waited, and Flint happened to have exactly the training required to use what remained. Sometimes destiny was only a name humans gave to a chain of people doing the right thing long enough for it to reach someone they would never meet. Eli's radio call broke the silence. "Corbin, status." He looked at Flint. "Release strap is accessible through the crawl space." Eli said nothing for a second, then quietly, "Understood." The service opening was too narrow for Corbin's shoulders. Flint could fit. Corbin hated that fact. He removed the short working tether and replaced it with the narrower safety line prepared specifically for the crawl space. He checked the dog's harness attachment twice. Flint waited. Corbin put a hand against his chest. The heartbeat was steady. 8 years old, still strong, not young. In another life, Corbin would not have hesitated. Today he did. That hesitation told him how much had changed. Ellie, any alternate mechanical access? Not in the time we have. How long to crest? Naomi answered instead. 21 minutes to first lower zone impact. Main crest later. Corbin closed his eyes once, then opened them. He pointed into the crawl space. Forward, Flint entered. The safety line moved steadily through Corbin's gloved hand. The opening curved slightly left. Soon only Flint's hindquarters were visible. Then nothing. Corbin listened, scraping claws, breathing, canvas shifting. He gave the directional cue. Right, movement, then take, silence, a soft metallic contact. Corbin pictured Flint finding the strap by scent, position, and training. Pull, the line moved. Metal, groaned, nothing released. Flint slipped. Corbin felt the sudden jerk through the safety line. His stomach tightened. Easy. The dog repositioned. Corbin heard claws searching for traction on rough concrete. Take, a pause, pull. This time the canvas snapped tight. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then a deep metallic crack sounded inside the assembly. The locking pin shifted out. Corbin looked at the wheel. Flint, back. The German Shepherd emerged tail first, twisted in the crawl space, then back toward Corbin. He was breathing hard. Dust streaked his coat. Corbin caught the harness and guided him clear. Good boy. He rarely used the phrase that way. Flint leaned against his leg for half a second, then stood, ready again. Corbin turned the manual wheel. It moved slowly, painfully, but it moved. Gate responding, Eli said. Corbin put his body into the wheel. The old mechanism rotated another quarter turn. Water pressure began changing behind the structure. A deep roar grew somewhere beyond the concrete. A 17 was opening. The old spill channel took water gradually at first, then faster. Eli monitored available pressure indicators while Naomi watched lower river gauges from town. Diversion increasing, Eli reported. Corbin continued the wheel. Gate opening 40%. Keep going. 50, 60. Corbin's shoulders burned. Water inside the chamber climbed above his boots. Flint stood on the higher ledge, tether connected to an anchor line. Then the hydraulic state changed. A pulse struck the channel. Water surged around Corbin's knees. Flint lost footing. His body slid sideways off the ledge. The safety tether snapped tight. The anchor bolt held. Corbin grabbed the rope, not the dog, and dropped his weight backward. Flint disappeared partly into the churning water. Hold! The command was almost meaningless. Flint fought for purchase. Corbin hauled line hand over hand while the fixed anchor carried most of the load. The German Shepherd's front paws struck the ledge. Slipped. Caught again. Corbin seized the harness only after Flint was within reach and pulled him onto the higher surface. For several seconds, neither moved. Flint coughed once, then breathed hard against Corbin's chest. Corbin wrapped both arms around him, not carefully, not professionally, like a man who had just seen an empty space where his oldest friend might have been. Not today, he whispered. Flint licked water from his nose. Corbin pressed his forehead against the dog's head for one brief second. Then the radio shouted, "Corbin, gate!" He stood. The work was not finished. A-17 reached its operational limit minutes before the first major pulse entered lower Alder Ridge. The town still flooded. There was never a version of the morning in which it did not. South Creek Road went underwater. A small bridge near the old mill lost one approach and twisted downstream. 3 storage buildings and several sheds were damaged. Water entered the first floors of 2 evacuated houses along River Lane. Near the cottage, the river climbed high enough to tear at the lower bank beneath the terrace. The old cedar tree August had cared for, massive, scarred, and older than the house, leaned as saturated soil disappeared around its roots. Corbin saw it happen after he and Flint emerged. The tree held for several seconds, then fell toward the river with a sound deeper than thunder. It was not a person. It was not a house. Still, Corbin felt the loss. Some things mattered because they had been there longer than anyone expected them to leave. But the water in the lower channel did not reach the modeled worst-case crest. Naomi watched the gauge trace flatten below the earlier projection. Evacuation had already removed people from danger. Road closures prevented vehicles from entering flooded crossings. North Vale's excavator kept the high-access route open long enough for emergency traffic. County crews handled drainage failures. A-17 moved part of the river through a route most people had forgotten existed. No single action saved Alder Ridge. The system survived because enough people did enough things correctly at the same time. That mattered to Corbin. He had spent much of his life in stories where people wanted one hero. Reality had almost never worked that way. By late afternoon, the crest had passed. Rainwater and snowmelt still filled the river, but the emergency curve was turning downward. Corbin sat on the wet grass above the cottage. His flannel shirt was soaked beneath the safety harness he had finally removed. Mud covered his faded jeans and old leather boots. Flint lay beside him. The German shepherd's chest rose and fell heavily. Mud darkened the tan fur along his legs. Silver hairs around his muzzle were plastered flat with water. When Flint tried to shift position, one hind leg trembled. Corbin immediately placed a hand beneath his hip. The dog looked at him, tired, alive. Corbin had faced death enough times to know that fear during danger was simple. There was an objective, a direction, something to do. The harder fear came afterward. It arrived when you could finally imagine what almost happened. Inside the tunnel, Corbin had not been most afraid of dying. He had been afraid of the safety line going slack. Afraid of reaching into the water and finding nothing. Afraid that after all the years Flint had followed him through places no dog should have needed to go, Alder Falls would be where Corbin asked for one mission too many. He stroked the wet fur along Flint's neck. "I'm sorry." Flint turned his head. There was no accusation there, only exhaustion. Corbin looked toward the empty place where the cedar had stood. For 2 years after leaving the Navy, he had avoided building anything he could lose. No real home, few attachments. No plans that reached very far. He had called it simplicity. Maybe part of it had been fear. If nothing belonged to tomorrow, tomorrow could not take anything away. Flint shifted closer and rested his head against Corbin's thigh. Corbin understood then how impossible that bargain had always been. Love did not become safer because you refused to admit it had an ending. The dog beside him would grow older. So would he. Alder Falls would change. People would leave. Trees would fall. One day something he loved would disappear no matter how disciplined, careful, prepared, or useful he had been. That was not a reason to remain detached. It was the reason the present mattered. Corbin rested his hand over Flint's shoulder. The river moved below them, brown and swollen, carrying branches through late afternoon light. The day Flint would not be there would come. Corbin knew that now. But it was not this day, not today. And for the first time, that felt like enough. 3 weeks after the river fell back inside its banks, Alder Ridge still smelled of wet earth, fresh lumber, and mud drying in places sunlight rarely reached. There had been no miraculous return to normal. South Creek Road remained closed while county crews rebuilt the damaged shoulder. The old mill bridge had survived only in the technical sense. One approach had washed out so badly that orange barriers now blocked both ends. 2 houses along River Lane stood with their lower walls open to the studs while industrial fans pushed damp air through rooms that had once held family photographs and dining tables. Nobody had died. That fact mattered more than everything else. It did not mean nothing had been lost. Corbin understood the difference. At the cottage, the place where the ancient cedar had stood was now an empty wound in the landscape. The root ball had torn open a section of earth near the terrace before the river carried most of the trunk downstream. For days afterward, Corbin kept looking toward the spot expecting to see the tree. Memory filled spaces faster than reality did. Flint noticed the absence differently. The German shepherd had once preferred the cedar's shade during warm afternoons. Now he would walk toward the familiar patch, hesitate, sniff the exposed ground, then choose the oak instead. Animals adjusted without pretending nothing had changed. Corbin was beginning to respect that skill. Flint had recovered from the tunnel ordeal with rest, food, and several deliberately easy days. His hind legs remained a little stiff after sleeping, exactly as they had been before the flood, but no new injury had appeared. He still moved with the lean, controlled athleticism of a retired working K9, black and tan coat healthy, amber-brown eyes bright, ears constantly sampling the world around him. Corbin watched him more than before. He tried not to. That was different. The flood had left Corbin's own body with bruises across his hips from the rescue harness and a deep ache through both shoulders. He wore the same red and black flannel shirt, light gray t-shirt, faded dark blue jeans, old brown leather work boots, and military watch that had become his civilian uniform. The flannel had gained another permanent stain near one cuff. He could have replaced it. He did not. Some things became more yours because they survived being used. Alder Ridge talked about the flood for weeks, though the stories changed depending on who told them. At the diner, some people credited Naomi Reyes for calling the evacuation early enough that families were already moving before the worst water reached town. At Public Works, people talked about Eli Mercer's engineering recommendation. Someone sent a letter to the county commission praising North Vale crews for providing equipment when they were under no contractual obligation to do so. Corbin heard his own name too, and Flint's. He disliked both, not because the recognition was false, but because stories tended to remove everyone except the easiest person to remember. Naomi refused to let that happen. At a small public meeting held in the high school gymnasium, she stood behind a folding lectern and listed every layer that had mattered: monitoring, geologists, dispatchers, deputies, road crews, shelter volunteers, equipment operators, engineers, residents who left when told, and the old diversion structure that happened to remain usable, because one stubborn man had spent decades refusing to forget it. Only at the end did she mention Corbin and Flint. Corbin appreciated the order. Flint slept under Corbin's chair through most of the applause. That seemed about right. Eli handled recognition less comfortably. Someone at the meeting called him a hero. He replied, "I filled out a form." Naomi, standing nearby, said, "Eventually." Eli stared at her. Corbin looked away to hide the smile. A week later, the first comprehensive engineering inspection of A-17 began. Some parts had performed better than anyone expected. Others had not. One narrow lower maintenance section showed new cracking and displacement where the mountain had shifted over many years. Lena Park reviewed the geological data with Eli and county engineers and recommended that section be permanently closed rather than repaired. Eli agreed. That decision bothered Corbin more than he expected. He had begun thinking of the underground system as if preserving all of it somehow honored August. Eli corrected him. "Maintenance isn't keeping everything alive forever," he said while they stood at the access junction. "Sometimes maintenance is knowing what needs to be retired before it kills somebody." Corbin looked down the corridor that would soon be sealed. The idea sounded uncomfortably applicable beyond concrete tunnels. He said nothing. A reinforced closure was installed the following week. A-17 would survive. Not unchanged. That was apparently the only way anything survived. North Vale's revised geotechnical review arrived near the end of the month. Graham Voss drove to the cottage personally. He looked more tired than the first time Corbin had met him. His dark blonde hair was slightly longer around the temples, and gray stood out more clearly in his trimmed beard. He still wore practical field clothes rather than business formal wear, but dust now covered his boots in a way that suggested he had stopped caring whether the mountain believed they were expensive. Corbin met him on the porch. Flint lay nearby in the shade without lifting more than his head. Voss carried no acquisition portfolio this time, only a rolled plan. "The original access route is dead," he said. Corbin leaned against the stone column. "Engineering dead or legally dead, both, which is the expensive kind." The reassessment had confirmed that the proposed alignment crossed too close to infrastructure, protected by August's recorded maintenance easement. The flood also changed the county's understanding of hydraulic risk along that side of the ridge. Conservation restrictions attached to several adjoining parcels further narrowed the available corridor. North Vale could challenge some of it. Voss had decided not to. "We could spend 2 years and several $100,000 proving we have the right to build a road nobody's going to like," he said. "Then spend several million building it. Sounds efficient." That was sarcasm. "I know." Voss looked across the lawn to the river. "We're evaluating another site farther south. For the resort? For a smaller version. Different access. Less river frontage." Corbin nodded. He had expected satisfaction. Instead, he felt only relief that the argument had ended without someone needing to be destroyed. Voss took several steps toward the edge of the terrace. "I was wrong about one thing," Corbin waited. "I saw this as a parcel. That's usually what developers call land. It's what spreadsheets call land." Voss glanced toward the cottage. Bellamy didn't. Corbin thought of the hidden chamber, rescue supplies, easements, notebooks, and all the maintenance August had done, after almost everyone else stopped caring. No. What did he see? Corbin looked at the river. "A promise, I think." Voss considered that. "I still think this county needs investment. I know. I still think people romanticize leaving things untouched. I know. And you still think men like me turn mountains into numbers." Sometimes Voss gave a short laugh. "Good. I was worried the flood had made us friends." "It didn't." "Excellent." He extended his hand. Corbin shook it. Respect did not require agreement. Sometimes it only required learning that the other man had reasons rather than excuses. Voss walked back to his vehicle. Before getting in, he pointed toward Flint. "Keep him off my future construction sites." Corbin glanced at the dog. "That depends on your construction sites." Voss nodded as though he had expected nothing else. Then he drove away. Corbin watched the dust settle behind the SUV. That chapter of Alder Falls had closed without a villain. He found that strangely satisfying. Cleanup inside the control chamber took another 2 days. Most of what had been damaged could be dried, cleaned, cataloged, or replaced. Owen Pike removed ruined supplies while Eli worked through the maintenance logs. Corbin cleaned one of the rear steel cabinets that had been partially blocked by an old panel. Flint rested near the door without his harness, recovering from a morning walk. Corbin removed 2 warped shelves. Behind the lower one, his knuckles struck something metal, not the cabinet wall, a separate box. He crouched. The steel container had been pushed deep into a recess behind the old control assembly. It was about the size of a large toolbox, sealed with a rubber gasket and secured by a simple latch. No lock, no combination, no attempt to hide it from someone who already knew the room. Corbin pulled it into the light. Dust came away beneath his hand. 4 words had been painted across the lid. If the water returns, Eli stopped writing. Owen looked over. Nobody spoke. Corbin felt the peculiar tightening in his chest that had accompanied almost every major discovery at Alder Falls. Not fear, not exactly curiosity. Recognition. August Bellamy had expected someone to open this box after a day when the old system mattered again. Corbin lifted the latch. Inside there was no money, no gold, no bearer bonds, no hidden fortune in the form people like to imagine fortunes. There was a thick, operational schematic wrapped in waxed cloth, a black notebook, several legal packets, 1 envelope bearing Corbin's full name, and a blue folder stamped Alder Falls Conservation Trust. Eli released a slow breath. Well, Corbin looked at him. That all you've got? I've learned not to say much when Bellamy boxes are involved. Owen pointed to the envelope. You opening that? Not here. For reasons Corbin could not explain, August's letter felt less like evidence than conversation. He wanted to hear it alone. He took the box upstairs. Helen Marlowe arrived at the cottage the following afternoon. The attorney placed the AFC documents across the kitchen table with the concentration of a person finally allowed to explain a joke she had been forced to keep secret. Flint lay beneath the open window. Corbin sat opposite her. Helen adjusted her tortoise-shell glasses. Alder Falls Conservation Trust was established 23 years ago. Corbin stared at her. You knew. I drafted part of it. You could have mentioned that. I was legally prohibited from disclosing the full structure until the triggering conditions in August's succession documents were satisfied. What conditions? His death. Your acceptance of the Bellamy parcel, and either your formal request for the trust records or confirmation that the emergency infrastructure had been placed back into active service. Corbin leaned back. August enjoyed making simple things difficult. No, August enjoyed making complicated things impossible to dismantle. Helen slid a valuation summary toward him. The current estimated trust assets totaled approximately $8.6 million. Corbin read the number twice. Helen immediately raised one finger. That number is going to mislead you if you stare at it too long. How much is cash? Wrong question. Usually the important one. Not here. Approximately $3. $7 million existed in investment endowment accounts accumulated over decades through August's savings, conservative investments, and several contributions from people who had used or supported the property. The remainder consisted of land, conservation holdings, the cottage, additional forest acreage acquired gradually around the river corridor, easements, infrastructure reserve funds, and appraised operational assets. Corbin read the schedule, then looked up. How much of this is mine? Helen's expression softened. None of it. Not in the way you're asking. Corbin nodded slowly. Oddly, relief came first. He had already been offered millions once. Money had given him an exit. This was something else. Helen explained that August had nominated Corbin as successor steward and trustee, subject to acceptance and normal fiduciary oversight. He could receive a reasonable salary for managing the property and operations, but he could not liquidate the trust and walk away rich. The trust had 3 permanent purposes: to protect the Alder River corridor and associated forest, to maintain trails, legacy emergency infrastructure, and access necessary for public safety, and to create a low-capacity recovery place for veterans, rescuers, and retired working dogs. Corbin stopped on the 3rd line. Working dogs? Helen glanced at Flint. You're surprised? No, not really. What exactly does recovery place mean? August deliberately left the implementation flexible. Small cabins, temporary stays, workshop space, trail access, no hospital, no clinical program unless future trustees partner with one. So not therapy, not necessarily. Good. Helen looked curious. Why? Sometimes people need somewhere to be before they're ready to explain why they're there. Helen's gaze rested on him for a moment. I suspect August would have accepted that answer. Corbin looked around the cottage. For months after retirement, he had believed what he needed was fewer obligations. August had left him an organization built almost entirely from obligations. The strange thing was that Corbin did not feel trapped. He felt oriented. There was a difference. He opened August's letter that evening. Flint lay beside his chair. Outside, the river had returned to a clearer summer flow, though fresh scars remained along the banks. August's handwriting was weaker than the note that had first brought Corbin to Alder Falls, but still deliberate. Corbin, if you are reading this, then either Helen finally decided rules matter more than my preference for mystery, or the water came back and somebody found the box. I hope it was the first. I suspect it was the second. Corbin smiled despite himself. The letter continued. August wrote about Corbin's father. Decades earlier, while both men were serving in the Navy, a mechanical failure during rough weather had thrown August into cold water beside a damaged vessel. He became tangled in loose line beneath the surface. Corbin's father went in after him. No ceremony, no calculation of debt. He cut August free and kept him above water until they were recovered. August spent years trying to repay a man who insisted there was nothing to repay. Eventually, he understood the debt was not supposed to move backward. It moved forward. Your father gave me years I was not guaranteed. I tried to use some of them well. Corbin stopped reading. His father had never told him the story. That seemed like him. The men who did certain things often spoke least about them. August explained that gratitude alone was not why he chose Corbin. Through veterans they both knew, he had followed Corbin's career from a distance. He knew about the Navy SEAL years. He knew Corbin had left active service. He knew Flint had retired with him, August wrote. Men who have spent too long protecting things are often told peace means they should finally live for themselves. I have never been convinced that is true. I think peace means we get to choose what is worth protecting. Corbin read the sentence again. Then came ash. August admitted what he had done in 1989. He had believed experience meant being the person in the room who recognized danger first. Ash proved otherwise. That dog taught me something pride had failed to teach. Wisdom does not always begin with knowing. Sometimes it begins with admitting that another creature heard the trouble before you did. Corbin looked down. Flint was asleep with his muzzle against one paw. There was no mystical design in the animal, no destiny written in his fur, only years of attention, discipline, trust, stubborn loyalty, and a way of sensing the world that Corbin could never share completely. That was enough. Near the end, August wrote, the station was never the concrete room below the house. It was never the cottage either. A station is a promise that somebody is still watching. If you stay, do not turn it into a monument to me. Build something useful. Corbin sat for a long time after the final line. He thought about what useful had meant for most of his adult life. Useful meant moving toward danger. Useful meant being stronger, faster, calmer, more prepared than circumstances demanded. Useful meant bringing people home. But August had stocked blankets, cleared trails, fixed generators, sat in Miriam's kitchen when there was nothing left to rescue. Maybe usefulness could also mean staying after the crisis stopped being interesting. Corbin looked through the window. He had spent 2 years believing ordinary life was what remained after meaningful work ended. Alder Falls was teaching him something else. Ordinary life might be the meaningful work. A year changed the property without erasing it. The stone cottage remained recognizable. Corbin refused every suggestion that would have turned it into something polished enough for a brochure. The cedar roof was properly repaired. Windows opened without force. The ivy was controlled rather than removed. The porch no longer shifted under weight. Where the ancient cedar had fallen, Corbin planted a young western red cedar. It looked absurdly small in the open space. That seemed appropriate. Beside it stood a simple plaque. For August and Ash, the watch continues. 3 modest cabins appeared farther into the forest, spaced widely enough to preserve privacy. An old barn was reinforced and converted into a workshop, gear room, and warm recovery area suitable for retired working dogs. The entrance sign read, Alder Falls Station. Nothing about the place promised healing. Corbin disliked promises no one could guarantee. People simply came. A retired firefighter spent 4 days rebuilding a chair nobody needed. One veteran fished every morning and spoke almost nothing until his last day. Another man brought an aging Labrador that slept 17 hours a day and regarded every meal as evidence that life remained worthwhile. Some visitors talked, some did not. Corbin learned not to measure improvement by conversation. Sometimes a person arriving with clenched shoulders left with them slightly lower. That was enough. Sometimes someone slept through the night. Enough. Sometimes a retired dog stopped pacing long enough to lie in sunlight. Enough. Miriam still brought food and denied that she was supervising anything. Eli visited A17 under a formal maintenance schedule that now involved more paperwork than he considered morally acceptable. Naomi made certain emergency plans were updated using current data rather than local legends. A17 remained a backup. Nothing more, nothing less. And Flint grew older, not suddenly. That would have been easier to recognize. His muzzle silvered gradually. He slept deeper in the afternoons. Standing after a long rest took an extra moment. Corbin adjusted their walks without discussing it. Shorter on steep days, longer when Flint chose the flatter trail. No pity, just adaptation. One bright summer morning, Corbin sat at the picnic table outside the cottage with his journal open and coffee cooling beside it. He wore the same old red and black flannel, gray t-shirt, faded jeans, brown work boots, and military watch. Flint lay beneath the table. Alder Falls shone in the distance. The river moved steadily below. Corbin thought about the apartment near Tacoma. Bare walls, furniture chosen because it was easy to leave. A life arranged so departure would require no explanation. He had believed he was the one who had brought Flint home after service. Technically, perhaps he had. He signed the paperwork, drove the dog away, bought the food, handled veterinary appointments. But during the 2 years when Corbin had lived as if tomorrow were an administrative inconvenience, Flint had done something quieter. He woke him every morning, made him walk, made him return home, made him remember feeding times, made another living creature dependent on his presence tomorrow. Then, at Alder Falls, Flint had kept listening when Corbin did not yet understand what there was to hear. Corbin looked beneath the table. "You know something annoying?" Flint opened one amber eye. "I think you brought me home too." The dog closed his eye again. Corbin nodded. "About the response I expected." After a while he shut the journal. "No tunnels today." One of Flint's ears rose. Then his head lifted. He looked toward the forest trail. Corbin followed the gaze. "You want to walk?" Flint stood, slowly, front legs first, then the hindquarters with that familiar extra beat. Corbin waited without helping. Flint straightened and looked at him. Still proud, still ready. Corbin rose. "All right." One walk. They followed the trail beyond the young cedar. Morning light moved through Douglas fir and alder leaves. The forest smelled of moss, sun-warmed bark, river water, and summer soil. Flint walked beside Corbin rather than ahead. Neither moved as quickly as they once had. Corbin no longer saw that only as loss. Some journeys were not improved by speed. Behind them stood a stone cottage with repaired windows. Farther back were cabins where people could come without explaining everything that hurt. Below the hill, the river continued through its old channel. There was no treasure left to discover, no wall waiting to open, no warning hidden beneath the earth. Only the ordinary work of keeping something alive. August had spent decades keeping water moving through forgotten machinery because he believed someone might need it later. Corbin finally understood that human lives worked much the same way. No one could keep an old cedar standing forever. No one could command a beloved dog not to grow old. No discipline could stop time. The task was never to preserve everything unchanged. The task was to carry forward what deserved to continue. Corbin looked down at Flint. The German shepherd glanced up. Then both turned toward the sunlit trail. The water kept moving, and so did they. Sometimes the miracle God sends into our lives does not arrive with thunder, angels, or a door suddenly opening in the sky. Sometimes it arrives quietly. It may come as a second chance hidden inside an unwanted inheritance. It may come as a stranger who stays when everyone else has gone home. It may come as an old road we almost refuse to follow. And sometimes it comes on 4 paws, walking faithfully beside us, until we finally understand that we were never as alone as we thought. Corbin believed he had brought Flint home from war. In the end, he discovered that Flint had been bringing him home all along. Maybe that is how God works in many of our lives. We pray for a great sign, while the answer is already sitting beside us at the breakfast table. We ask for purpose, while someone nearby simply needs our patience. We ask for a miracle, while God may be giving us another morning, another person to love, another chance to forgive, another reason to keep going. Life does not promise that the old trees will never fall. It does not promise that the people or animals we love will stay forever. Time continues to move, just as the river does. But perhaps faith is not asking God to stop the river. Perhaps faith is trusting Him enough to keep walking beside it. So today, notice the people who have quietly stayed beside you. Call someone you have been meaning to call. Sit a little longer with the person who needs you. Take the walk with the old dog. Say the words you keep thinking you will have time to say later. Because sometimes the greatest miracle is not that something lasts forever. It is that God gave it to us at all. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need a reminder that hope can still find us in unexpected places. And I would love to hear from you in the comments. Has there ever been a person, an animal, or an unexpected moment in your life that you now believe God placed in your path for a reason? If you enjoy stories about faith, loyalty, second chances, veterans, and the extraordinary bond between people and dogs, please subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Stories and join us for the next journey. May God bless you, bless your family, protect those you love, comfort those you miss, and give you strength for whatever road lies ahead. And wherever you are watching from, may you never forget this. As long as God gives us another morning, there is still a reason to keep moving forward.